Cyberpunk, shiny in chrome. 41. Chapter 41, New Digs. Michael Magos Sobranov. Hey, what's this? My packing was interrupted by a curious Rebecca, and I looked up to find her tiptoeing next to my work table, staring curiously at a thin titanium chain with a small locket attached to the end of it. Absently, I also noticed she had gained a good 3 inches in height. A complete coincidence, I am sure. Shaking my head, I finished shuffling the rest of my surgical tools into the box before quickly duct taping it closed and stood up. Just a souvenir, I said, placing the box atop a large stack. My last job went. Her eyes sparkled with excited curiosity. I exhaled and shrugged. Well, it definitely went. Ah, come on, she threw her hands up. Don't blueball me like that. I projected a thoroughly amused glint through my optics. She huffed, ears reddening slightly. You know what I meant, Gonk. Fine, fine. I rolled my eyes, chuckling. I got into a bit of a scrap. Uh-huh, she deadpanned, and then I got shot in the face. I finished with a deadpan. Wait. She blinked, excitement quickly giving way to worry. Shit, for real? Right through the eye. I nodded with false cheer, my mechadendrites snaking out from behind me to pick the necklace up as I did. But I lived and most of them didn't, so I decided to keep this little thing as a commemoration. And a reminder. Her eyes followed the extra limb in a mildly dazed manner, but I quickly put it out of my mind. My work was indeed awe-inspiring, enough said. The locket hanging off the chain looked like a small metal cog surrounding the amber-colored see-through components of my ruined optic, and proudly kept within it was the crumpled bullet that ruined it, and nearly ruined me. Crushing the surge of hesitation the memory brought, I shut my eyes and slowly put the necklace on, before letting out a sharp exhale and opening them up again, forcing my back straight. Seeing me giving any potential trauma the proverbial middle finger, Rebecca simply grinned and shot me a thumbs up. That is Nova as fuck. Glad you like it. I grinned and got back to packing, and promptly ignored the desire to sag into the worried hug she gave me a moment later. 2 days had passed since the Militech gig, and aside from some worried questions from Mom, I was left mostly to my own devices. She was too perceptive to not notice that something was going on with me, but thankfully didn't press me on it. Her reaction when I told her I got us a new place to live was even more baffling, as instead of the annoyance and irritation I expected, she immediately began telling me how proud she was of me and preparing things for the move. Her reaction was exactly what I needed at that moment, even if I never knew it. For a few brief moments, I had simply allowed myself to bask in it, daring to accept that things could in fact still be well, despite the constant danger we lived in. The feeling persisted the following day, even if subdued, and I finally managed to calm myself down somewhat. I could not fix all of my problems at once, and I cautiously accepted that I didn't have to either. Not that I considered allowing myself to grow complacent again either. I simply had a plan to follow now, leaving my worry and fear redundant, and thus unnecessary. Jugo had also called inquiring about my services, and even he was more than happy to delay things by a few days so I could prepare actual facilities. Something about his rich contacts, finding a closet room operation, something of a dubious prospect. People were weird like that. Yesterday was spent mostly in preparation, and aside from a few calls to check on how my team was doing, they were both perfectly fine and recovering quickly. I took most of the day to finish packing while tapping away at my next personal cyberware project. Not being able to EMP lace literally everything was an irritating prospect, but unless I wanted to increase both my width and height by half a foot without losing other functionality, I had to make some concessions, which is why I decided to ignore the specialized protection idea in its entirety and merely make my power supply ridiculously robust, to the point a disruption would simply do nothing but potentially tickle a bit. Probably should add a redundancy organ of some kind for emergency resets, just in case though. I shook the sudden idea away, after noting it down in my agent of course, and focused back on the present. You do know you don't have to do that, right? I side-eyed Rebecca. She kept lugging a couple of boxes as we walked across the length of my floor of the mega building. I said I'd help, didn't I? She asked. I didn't call you over just so you can lug boxes with me, I pointed out, absently nodding at the few passers-by who greeted me. And I still want to anyway, she chirped, smirking up at me. All right, fine. I pretend to complain, letting out a dramatic sigh. You can keep trying to impress Mom as much as you like. Damn right I will. She looked away. That woman is scary. Scary? I blinked. Yeah. She nodded a few times. She is just so intense. I tilted my head, I suppose. Actually, you are too, Rebecca hummed, but it makes you hot, so it doesn't count. She then hummed lightly, eyes narrowing in thought. Actually, pretending I didn't just nearly miss a step, I ignored the latter part of that and quickly pointed out, you seemed to be fine with her last time. Yeah. She turned back to me with a teasing smirk. I was blissed out of my mind then. This time I did miss a step, and she burst out laughing. Taking a deep breath, I gave her a look. You'll regret that later. She just smirked at me smugly, challengingly. I accepted my defeat, for now, and changed topics. How is your crew doing anyways? Her mood immediately soured. Fine, she shrugged. Could be better, but we are keeping it together. Need me to break some legs? I asked. Nah, it isn't that bad. She laughed as she waved me off. They are just getting pissed at being cooped up. Maine is probably going to get Falco to get him, Dorio and Sasha away to stay with his nomad clan for a while. Falco, I thought aloud. That's your driver, right? Yeah. She nodded. He was out of NC for a while, but he is part of the crew too. I hummed non-committally. What about Pilar? Ugh. Her face scrunched up. The gonk actually likes the fucking cave you got us. Hey, I said, fake offended, it is a nice-ass cave. Not with that gonk stinking it up. She fired back immediately, making me laugh. Well, he won't be having it for much longer. I pointed out with a chuckle, which mollified her somewhat. Besides, if you don't want to stay with him, you can always just crash in my place. She considerably brightened up at that. Seriously? Yeah. I nodded, not feeling even slightly hesitant about it. Heat from your gig is already dying down anyway, so you won't even have to hide that much. What do you think? Fuck yes, I'll come over. She grinned and quickly added, for a bit anyway. Ah, to be expected, really, fair enough. We kept chatting as we passed almost the entire floor on the way to my new apartment. When we first started moving about, the people of the floor got worried I was abandoning them. But that lasted only a while, as they quickly learned we weren't moving away from the floor itself, just to another part of it. It was almost funny how reliant my neighbors had become on me for their peace and quiet, even if I had long since stopped personally ensuring it. That task was now completely and utterly automated, which is exactly why I almost found it funny. All those issues solved with such little effort. And yet no one but me ever bothered. My mood was thankfully not completely ruined by the time we reached my new home, and the train of thought was quickly forgotten as I started feeling giddy all over again. My new base of operations was positioned in the corner of floor 16, separated from the central bustling street by a walled walkway that gave a perfect view of all the floors below, up to and including the bottom of the entire tower. The apartment itself was a massive two-story plot previously belonging to some kind of large clothes shop that went bankrupt some 2 years ago without anyone bothering to replace it after I fried the last minor gang who tried setting up there. Rumors about a curse of the net hanging about the place quickly made it a less than attractive purchase. Whoops. Bigger gangs naturally were not retarded enough to believe that kind of thing, except maybe Maelstrom, but they were into that shit, the weirdos. And while the Tiger Claws were eyeing the place for a good while, my agreement with Jugo made the entire issue a moot point. Crazy fucker probably thought I did it all on purpose, which was oddly flattering, I think. Lunatic gangsters aside, the section was about 6 times as large as my previous home on both floors, and a small balcony on the second floor had a perfect view of the only approach leading up to it. That we had a balcony which looked outside for once was something my mother found amazing, and I quickly surrendered the room attached to it to her. We had a lot of space to go around now, with some of it remaining unused even after we prepared an extra room for guests, and I was not particularly picky about it anyways. And that was the upper floor alone. It would take some getting used to, having an entire floor dedicated just to my tinkering. The thought still made me giddy as all hell. So giddy I barely even noticed as we closed in on the walkway and were greeted by a tiny Chinese woman who just happened to be old Chu's wife. "Are you finally moving in today, dearie?" she asked me, her accent very pronounced. "Yes, ma'am." I nodded quickly. "We'll be sure to invite you over when everything is done." "Good." The woman nodded as if it was the most natural thing in the world. "It will be nice to have some actually honest neighbors for once." My expression turned as wry as I could make it. "Definitely, ma'am." Rebecca failed to hide her snickers. That whole family was whack. The old noodle seller was all kinds of happy when he learned we were moving right next to his home, and doubly so when I told him I'd be installing hidden turrets that had a line of fire over the entirety of his home. Fucker was rubbing his hands like he had won the lottery. "You two certainly took your time." The moment we entered the new home, we were greeted by Misty's lightly teasing voice. "Got everything?" "Yep," Rebecca chirped and lifted her stack of boxes. "Where do I take these?" "Upstairs," I said, pointing up. "To the kitchen. I'll join you in a bit. Just need to sort these real quick." They both nodded, left up the stairs, chatting away as they did. And I made battle with the temptation to listen in on whatever Misty was teasing Rebecca about, thankfully winning in the end. Spying on one's partner was for the weak-willed. Shaking my head, I made my way into what would become my workspace. Already the main Ripperdoc clinic space was filled to the brim with fresh deliveries. A bunch of tiger claw mooks, more than happy to bring the operation tables and monitors up for the tiniest chance of making a good impression on me. Because apparently I was now a higher up in this territory, even if I wasn't part of the gang. Sometimes, especially in situations like this, I caught myself thinking I am sinking a bit too deep into my alliance with the gang. But then the benefits kick in, and I forget all about it. Money made everything better, and if anyone tries to convince you otherwise, then they are probably trying to scam you out of yours. 3 other rooms were attached to the main clinic that took up most of the space, one of them being a bathroom to the leftmost corner, and the other 2 serving more specialized roles. The first, and smaller one of the 2, was located in the relative middle of the far wall and was separated from the others by an airlocked doorway, holding a medicine and chemical storage, as well as a fully equipped lab for my future experiments in that field. I was nowhere near as enthusiastic about these sciences as I was with cybernetics, but I knew that letting them fall on the wayside after investing all that effort would be an insult to both myself and what I could accomplish. The second room, almost as large as the clinic proper and attached to the rightmost wall, was still a mess of loot and scrap, and a work in progress, but a freshly redesigned servo arm seat for my self-modification, and a trio of 3D printers alongside ample more manual working spaces already made it a considerable workshop. It also served as my armory, holding my heavily damaged but still intact weapons of choice, as well as some memorable pieces of loot. This one I'd have to lock with a proper blast door when I had the money for it. I quickly found the shelf meant to hold my surgical tools and unpacked the boxes I was carrying, organizing everything with a near-obsessive meticulousness, as I already began planning on how to make the most efficient use of the space when the customers started coming in. "Mikey." The muffled and ever so slightly irritated voice of my mother coming from above quickly informed me I may have let time get away from me. "Coming," I quickly called back and bolted upstairs, and there in the dining room/kitchen that was larger than our previous living room, I found the 3 of them waiting around a dining table, a veritable feast of everything I could think of spread out atop it as my mother tapped her foot in annoyance. While Misty and Rebecca were trying to hold back their snickers, I'd have to lose track of time more often. Mom's eye twitched and Rebecca began laughing her ass off. "Ah," I blinked. "I said that aloud, didn't I?" Mom simply smiled. "Set the table, Michael." The false cheer in her voice did not in fact make me bolt straight through a chair, and don't believe anyone who tells you otherwise. The evening found me seated atop the inner balcony, sipping on a bottle of root beer and listening to Rebecca's quiet snoring in the room behind me. My eyes trailed over the loud and dense crowd of returning workers, finally free of their ungodly work shifts and looking to crash or grab a bite at their favorite shitty food place. Slaving away just for a scrap of food, I found myself muttering, my mood falling slightly despite the day being one of my better ones. What a miserable existence. Rebecca's snort quickly informed me that she was in fact not asleep, monologuing into the distance. Really? Ugh. I kept staring forward in embarrassment. Go back to sleep? Nope, she chirped, getting up from bed and walking over to join me. Absently, I offered her another beer, which she eagerly took as she passed me by, following my gaze and frowning as she no doubt caught on to what I was talking about. Before she could tease me further, though, I was rescued by a sudden call on my agent. Jackie. Yo, Choom. You know that crazy cabrona I told you about? From the border? I raised a finger to stop Rebecca from interrupting and answered. Yeah? What about her? The Latino grinned. I finally got her to come and hang out. You want to come? Huh, the corpo actually kept her word. 42, Chapter 42, Lizzie's Take 2. Rebecca. No, Rebecca, please don't bring guts into the nightclub. Mike sighed over the wheel, his steering remaining perfectly straight despite it. Take your Saratoga. You bought it for a reason. But you said the corpo bitch was suspicious. Rebecca grinned, purposefully leading him on as she leaned in. Shouldn't I bring the big guns just in case? Any corpo bitch is suspicious, he retorted, leaning back against his seat and looking up to the smog-covered sky for salvation. But all I said is we should keep our wits about us. I doubt Jackie's Choom is stupid enough to try shit at Lizzie's. Knowing Susie, she might just be bitch enough to let her. Rebecca laughed, ignoring the twinge of pain she felt at the thought. She never liked me talking back to her. She isn't that bad, Mike assured, a bit of a hard-ass bitch, but he shrugged as she snorted. Everyone in her position has to be. He gave her a quick sideways look. Besides, she didn't exactly ban you from Lizzie's, so that's got to be worth something. Don't use logic against me, Rebecca pointed up at him accusingly. It doesn't work. My apologies, madam, he said dryly. Rebecca raised her nose and smirked. They drove in silence for a while then, the van's radio playing Who's Ready for Tomorrow at a barely audible volume as the streets of Little China whizzed by them like a stream of neon light. Man! Mike sighed as he drove into a parking lot. I just hope Jackie is doing fine. Why wouldn't he be? Rebecca asked. He cringed slightly, the movement barely even noticeable on his metal face, if not for his mouth twitching oddly. Not sure if I should be talking behind his back. He muttered before immediately maturely doing exactly that. But he has a bit of a chip on his shoulder. Oh? Rebecca's eyes widened before taking on an irritated glint. Think he got jealous or something? I mean, I sincerely doubt that, but… He exhaled. I can't help but think about it. If he stops being your Choom over that, then he wasn't ever your Choom. Rebecca said almost immediately, voice serious before it turned slightly teasing. Also, didn't he just call you over? Mike looked away. I know, I just… Rebecca smirked, hopped up on her seat, absently noting how oddly easy the movement felt, and surprised him with a quick peck as he turned back. Stop thinking about it, Gonk. It will be fine. Gah! The cyborg twitched before sighing and allowing a smile to spread on his face. All right, you win. Best remember it, mister. She smirked in victory, only to have her freshly dyed black hair messed up in retribution as the van stopped. Michael Magos Sobranov. You can stop glaring at me now. It isn't that bad. I chuckled as we approached the crowded entrance to Lizzie's. Rebecca crossed her arms, eyes narrowing, just as a bit of hair she had spent the last minute forcing down sprang up again. I tried keeping my chuckles down and failed miserably. Thankfully, we had already reached the entrance by then, where a familiar bat-wielding bouncer stood guard, the sight making Rebecca forget her grievance instantly as she visibly perked up. Back again, Borg boy, Rita Wheeler smirked. Knew you couldn't get enough of us. My poor reactor dims at your absence, I said dryly before smirking and giving her a lazy wave. Sup, Rita, doing good. She rolled her eyes, hadn't had to break any bones yet, but the night is still young, she said, and was about to keep going when she noticed Rebecca standing next to me. And who is this? Borg boy finally got himself an output? Seriously, Rita, Rebecca deadpanned. The bouncer paused at the voice before her eyes widened. Holy shit, Becca. Sup? The diminutive gremlin waved. She was wearing a simple hoodie and jeans combo. Her eyes were brown instead of bright red/orange, and her hair was black instead of green. The only thing that remained the same was her skin tone. Told you the disguise would work as a charm, I said a bit too smugly. Yeah, no shit, Rebecca muttered before pointing at Rita accusingly, and I thought we were chums. But the bouncer just rolled her eyes and the two shared a quick laugh. Still hiding out from your gig? Know about that, huh? Rebecca asked, giving me a quick side-eye. Not too hard to find out about it, Rita shrugged, if you know where to ask. And where better than at NC's premier public house, I quipped, much to her momentary confusion. Did you see Jackie come in yet? Nope. She shook her head, leaning her bat across her back and then her hands against the bat. I'll shoot you a message when I see him. Think you can do me a quick favor while you wait? Why not? Need someone thrown out? I asked. Why would I share the fun? She smirked cockily before shaking her head. But no, I need you to go downstairs and talk to the twins. They got some kind of chip Judy has been trying to decrypt for days. Think you can give it a shot? They going to be as eager as I remember? I asked, already dreading it. What's the matter? She leaned in with a shit-eating grin. Big bad Magos can't take some heat. No, I said simply, you just weren't wrong about the whole output thing. Rita's eyes widened before snapping to a beaming Rebecca, who was currently looking away, her visible ear slightly red. Damn, girl, Rita whistled. You work fast. Rita! Rebecca groaned. Before I could speak up, the bouncer grabbed me by the shoulder and started pushing me inside. In you go, Borg boy. I have questions that need answering. Not moving an inch, I gave Rebecca a questioning look. Want to stay and catch up for a bit? She was fully red in the face by now, but still nodded. Yeah, I don't think I'll survive the twins if I go with you. Oh shit, didn't even think about that. Rita chortled, and I let her push me along inside. The last I heard before the doors shut behind me was, now I want details, girl, all of them. Rolling my eyes, I waved off the BD seller at the entrance of the nightclub and made my way through the crowd. It wasn't yet the sea of bodies it was known for, but it was getting there quickly. A few of the Mox bouncers gave me evaluating looks, doubly so those who didn't know of me and saw my color scheme, but I quickly detected a few calls going to an office above the club proper, and they quickly calmed down, even if I could feel dozens of optics following my every step. The Mox standing guard at the entrance to their BD workshop in the back frowned as she saw me approach, her shoulders tensing and a light shiver of fear passing through her spine as she realized a Fullborg had approached her and she was now obligated to stop him. Luckily for her, I was not enough of an asshole as to try and force my way in. Rita told me to give Judy and the twins a visit. I spoke, I go by Magos, give them a call and they'll clear it up. The poor woman's shoulders sagged in relief, and she quickly did as I asked, and she almost fell over as the call was answered, and she most likely got the confirmation. She let out a long exhale before waving me in. They said to let you in. Thanks, I nodded, and sorry about that. Ha! The woman huffed self-deprecatingly. My fault for getting shit scared over nothing. True, I agreed and promptly ignored her look of irritation as I shut the door behind me. The back rooms of Lizzie's were far less colourful than the nightclub itself, and the number of grey, almost bunker-like hallways seemed like it would be incredibly easy to get lost in. Thankfully, I detected a suite of BD workshop hardware nearby and simply followed it to my destination. I tried everything. An unfamiliar, lightly Latino-accented female voice greeted me over the din of distant club music. I just don't have the kind of hardware needed to get into this thing. It's fine, Judy. The far more familiar voice of one of the twins came in response. Her sister finished for her, help is on the way. Tremble in awe. I deadpanned as I entered the BD workshop at that exact moment. The twins, knowing I was coming, simply grinned at me playing along. Seeing two people I rescued from an unfortunate fate made me feel oddly annoyed for whatever reason, but I was not given the time to ponder it. Judy Alvarez, the Mox's resident BD artist, was quite obviously not informed of just who was coming. She went to get up in a sudden spike of panic and tripped over the mess of cables below her, stumbling back and tipping her rather heavy-wheeled chair back. Shitty cable management will do that to you, I tutted, or she would have tripped if I didn't grab her hand at the last minute, thankfully being cognizant enough to keep my mechadendrite hidden this time. The BD artist looked back at me in confusion before her eyes flashed in annoyance. Thanks, she muttered as she let herself be pulled back up and glared at the twins. You two are not nearly as funny as you think you are, she snapped at them. The two just giggled like schoolgirls. Our knight in shining armor, Melody sang, is quite the sight. Melanie went on for her, and then as one, right? Right, Judy grumbled as she disentangled her feet. How nice of you to warn me. But Judy, Melody smirked and Melanie added, where is the fun in that? All the BD artist could do to that was sigh in defeat. As fun as this is, my lip twitched as I finally decided to cut in, what did you need my help with? The pair turned serious, as if a switch had been flipped. We managed to get our hands on a chip, one said, and the other continued. A careless client we chose to entertain left it and didn't ask for it back. Judy made a noise of frustration. I've been trying to get into it for days, but nothing seems to work. Absently, I scanned her setup and nodded. Second generation, pretty robust for BD scrolling, but not really made for modern chipping. She nodded in agreement, her expression shifting as if to say, what can you do? Instead, I turned to the twins, and dare I ask who this chip is connected to? Melanie and Melody shared a look before they both answered, Shobo, the claw that tried to take us. Ah, I voiced, showing nothing. Want me to give it a look? They both quickly nodded and immediately turned to Judy expectantly. Be my fucking guest. The woman shrugged and pulled the chip out of her computer. Picking it up carefully as to not crush it, I gave it a quick scan before inserting it into my neural port. I had never stopped gathering information on Shobo in simple hopes he'd give me a way to grab Werner without me needing to go the more riskier route. So breaking through the protections on his chip was even easier than usual, as some of his codes were used by his subordinates. And what I found within was exactly what I expected. And yet not what I wished for. It was another contact, no info on my true target. An XBD recording location, or at least the general area of one. Some kind of hotel, I think, I said after about 5 seconds, making the twins frown and Judy goggle at me like I had two heads or something, over in Kabuki again. Both of them sighed and Melody said, not much we can do there. Melanie drew her into a hug. We will make him pay one day. Apologies, ladies. I began spinning the lie as I ejected the unlocked chip and placed it in Judy's hands. I'm under a lot of scrutiny from the Tigers at the moment, so I can't really go in guns blazing, drew a lot of attention when pulling you out of the fire. We understand. They both said, thanks for helping. My previous twinge of annoyance returned for a flash but disappeared just as quickly. Always happy to ladies. I tipped my invisible hat. I'd have to involve them both when I inevitably ruined that man's entire career. A message appeared in the corner of my eye just as the twins turned from serious to mischievous again, and as much as I'd like to stay and chat, I have prior arrangements. Oh, the duo pouted but didn't try to stop me. The night at Lizzie's had started in full by the time I returned from the back rooms, and I had to literally wade through the writhing mass of dancers and partygoers, slapping away curious hands as I did. At the 5th attempt, I got slightly annoyed and may have twitched my hand a bit too hard, and my audio receptors were filled with a satisfying crack as the drunken offender reeled away in pain. I didn't bother looking back as I finally found my way to the booth area, near which I could see Rita talking to Rebecca, who was now far more at ease and immediately grinned as she saw me. The bouncer quickly noticed my approach after that and gave me a wave before lightly pushing Rebecca my way and leaving. Rita had a lot of leeway within the mocks, but she couldn't be seen as doing too much slacking. I put it out of my mind as Rebecca hopped over to me and we made our way to Jackie and his choom, Jackie Wells. Relax, Chica. He smiled at his newest choom. No need to worry, the two are good people. Well, he barely got to know the latter, but he was sure she was fine. Damn it, Jackie, I'm too tired for this shit. The voice of the Arasaka operative carried a light, tired rasp as she spoke, her face still half buried in the crook of her left arm, as her right held up an emptied shot glass. Man, those fucking corpses really drain the soul out of a choom. Jackie shook his head silently. His corpo chum pulled herself up slightly, the black mess that was her hair falling to the sides to reveal her thoroughly exhausted expression. Her eyes, a sharp red that would usually be far more threatening, had bags under them and drooped even as her gaze remained focused. Her face was sharp and angular, to the point it was probably biomodded at least a few times, but still had a few light freckles spread about. Just enough to be tasteful. She wore a black neo-militaristic Arasaka office suit, the sleeves of the vest rolled up to reveal arms with multiple cybernetic grooves running down their length. "You can't just keep sleeping in your office, V," Jackie said cheerily, ignoring the light glare directed his way. "You got to live it up a little, or else you are going to burn out." "Ugh." V groaned back into her hand. "You have far too much energy for this early in the day." "You mean late, right?" It wasn't even midnight yet. She didn't answer. "You mean late, right, V?" Jackie repeated, now a bit more worried. The only response the woman gave was the slightest upwards twitch of her lip before she buried her face back into her arm. Or at least that is what she would have done if Mike and Rebecca didn't choose that exact moment to enter. And Jackie was immediately reminded why he thanked his lucky stars every day that he somehow managed to stumble his way into surviving his first encounter with the corpo. As she immediately tensed, her entire body shifting from relaxed into aggressive, and she prepared to lunge. He probably should have told her about the Fulborg thing. Michael Magos Sobranov. I barely had the time to finish my scan of the Arasaka rat before she lunged at me with fucking mantis blades springing out of her arms, every move aiming for the kill without an ounce of hesitation. My right hand whipped forward, slapping away her right into her left, with enough force to throw her aside, just as my cyberdeck began churning out heat. To my momentary surprise, the corpo had enough chrome in her arms to only be moved and not thrown, and she immediately went for a counterattack with a stomp kick to my left knee. The attack simply bounced off, even if it would have definitely cracked through human bone, and she used the distraction to go for my throat with her blades, but by that time my demons had already bypassed her ice and her mantis blades deactivated before they were summarily expelled by her considerable protections. She adapted near instantly, just barely managing to redirect the punch heading for her throat with her right hand, paying for it a painful groan of metal coming from just below her fake skin. At that exact moment, my left-hand burrier came up, aiming for her center mass, while she quick drew a nue at my chest. My win. I grinned down at her, knowing she couldn't damage me and feeling my cyberdeck hook a deeper connection to her cyberware. "You sure about that, big guy?" She smirked without an ounce of fear. My mechadendrite twitched as I became cautious. Holy fucking shit. That was just about the time Jackie managed to finish getting up. And Rebecca whipped out her SMG, "Sit your fat ass back down, bitch." The corpo's eyebrows went up as she mouthed, "Fat?" "Let's all calm down now," Jackie said slowly. "This is all one big misunderstanding." "Misunderstanding?" The rat glared and asked, "What am I supposed to misunderstand about a fucking FBC popping up when I go for drinks?" "Seriously, Jack," I deadpanned, surprising the woman. "You'd think this is something that would pop up." "Yeah, Jack." The corpo nodded along, tension slowly leaving her. "Seriously?" "Yeah." Even Rebecca was looking at him like he was a dumbass. Jackie groaned and flipped us off. "Oh, fuck you all." And then promptly decided to ignore us as he poured himself another shot and downed it. The corpo snorted, quickly followed by my own amused exhale and Rebecca's snickers. "Name's V." She relaxed, returning her weapons to their holsters, and I did mean weapons because she somehow managed to grab a stun baton without me seeing it and pointed a thumb at Jackie behind her. "This gonks Chum, apparently." "V?" I asked, my amusement clear as I slowly let her go. "If we are doing nicknames, then I guess I'm Margos." Rebecca rolled her eyes good-naturedly and gave her a quick wave. "I'm Becca, this gonk's output." Huh. V, or Valerie as her agent, provided interesting. "So," Rebecca said to Jackie as we all slowly took our seats, "how did you meet a corpse slave anyway?" "Down, girl," both V and I said at the same time. Her eye twitched as she looked between V and myself, and Jackie choked on his drink. The poor Latino man spent a good 20 seconds coughing his airways clear before shaking his head and muttering a few curses in Spanish. "I guess I can tell you about it," he said as he finally relaxed again, "if you don't mind, V." The once more half-asleep corpo just shrugged. "Not like I am the one sharing it," she said with a yawn. "Go for it." Jackie's expression turned wry, and he began his spiel about the gig at the Mexican border. The tension from our original greeting disappeared quite quickly after that, and ever so slowly V seemed to start relaxing in our presence. She was obviously heavily overworked, and I could already see the signs of over-reliance on stimulants on her face, but felt it wasn't really my place to point it out. Besides, the Corps didn't really give you much of a choice when it came to these things. I already knew the broader strokes of what happened, but Rebecca had a great time asking questions about everything and then teasing Jackie whenever he told us about a mistake he made. Naturally, he didn't think it was a mistake, but both Rebecca and V were more than happy to point it out for him, and I graciously spared him of my own commentary and simply enjoyed myself as the two of them seemed to hit it off. Though I did make sure to give him a rather smug look when V pointed out he only managed to get one over her because she didn't expect him to shrug off a direct hit from a foot away, to which he just laughed along. Not once did Jackie mention the afterlife, and I was more than happy to leave it that way. "So what's your story?" The corpo, or V I supposed, turned to me. "Not often you see an FBC in a place like Night City." "Not many of us outside of orbit, true." I nodded, "but I don't really think." Before I could redirect the conversation, an angry voice cut me off. "There he is, bro. That's the motherfucker." As one, all four of us turned to the entrance of the booth where a group of what looked to be 6th Street gangoons were gathered and glaring up at us. Or at least they were, until they realized they were currently staring up directly into the annoyed golden eyes of a 7-foot-tall full cyborg. Now usually I am more than happy to de-escalate things when necessary, but I was still a bit revved up after nearly entering a murder battle with a corpo. So when the dumbass clutching his broken hand decided to start throwing insults at me, I didn't give his bro a chance to back away with grace. Instead, I reached forward faster than most of them could follow and yanked the sack of meat towards me, smashing his head against the booth table and knocking him out instantly. The gangoons were surprised by the sudden aggression and all flinched away as one of them was taken out. And it would seem I wasn't the only one still strung up about things, because in the next blink, V was kicking the bro in the face, Rebecca and Jackie looking at us with surprise before the former grinned and hopped in to join the party, and the latter groaned into his hands. Half an hour later, the four of us were sitting atop a slab of concrete a few minutes away from Lizzie's bar, and holding bottles of beer each. V sighed in contentment, looking far lighter despite the small splotches of blood on her hands. "You have no idea how much I needed that." "Something tells me it was a fucking lot," I quipped. "Damn, girl," Rebecca laughed, "and I thought Mike was brutal." "You kicked the poor hombre in the balls, chica." Jackie shook his head in faux lament. "That just isn't done." "Gonk shouldn't have been in ball-kicking distance then." Rebecca shrugged, much to V's amusement. "Well?" Jackie exhaled. "That didn't go as I thought it would, but still, all is well that ends well." "We got banned from Lizzie's," V pointed out dryly, "for a month." "Yeah," Jackie scowled lightly, "and whose fault is that, huh?" Without an ounce of shame in her dead corporate heart, she pointed at me. "Worth." I simply shrugged and sipped my beer without a care in the world. "Why do I even bother?" the Latino grumbled to himself before picking up his bottle and raising it in a toast. "To you, you bastardos locos." Nodding along, I raised my own bottle, with Rebecca following suit. V looked almost lost for a moment before hesitantly rising her own to this. She said and took a quick, awkward sip. The look of unbridled horror on Jackie's face as she said that was something I immediately burned deep into my memory banks. 43, Chapter 43, V Interlude. The Corpo. She woke up to the obnoxiously loud beeping of her agent. Her eyes, having been programmed to do so the night before, snapped open on their own, ripping away any potential comfort that could draw her back to sleep. "Ugh," Valerie Price groaned, feeling like she had been ran over by a truck. Really should have stopped at the 5th shot. She mumbled, "Fuck." As always, she briefly contemplated flipping Arasaka the bird and just sleeping in for once, but good sense won out as it did every time before then, and she rolled herself over, misjudging the distance and promptly plopping face first onto the floor. Phew! She was fully awake now and sighed in annoyance. Why me? Before pushing herself up and tossing her blanket back on the bed. Despite her still feeling like she could sleep for a week straight, she was feeling a bit lighter today. Last night was fun, even if it ended up being a roller coaster of excitement and adrenaline instead of the drinking binge she expected. She allowed herself a small smile before her biomonitor decided to ruin even that. Detecting high stress fatigue levels in the user's neural network. Recommend extended rest and recuperation to avoid long-term health risks. Just as the words registered, the room began to spin, but she quickly shook the sensation away. Her ever so lightly trembling hand, that was also fucking dented now, reaching for her end table. She inhaled the synaptic booster as if it were a lifeline, and her world immediately returned to full brightness, even if she was forced to ignore the acidic taste she knew would stay with her for hours. Of course, her biomon had something to say about that as well. Detecting higher than recommended adrenal enhancer concentration in the user's body. Further overuse without professional treatment may result in long-term health risks for the user. Fuck off. She snapped at nothing before sighing and rubbing her face, not like I have much of a choice. Jenkins, the fucking psycho, had been riding her ass ever since she got back from Mexico. It wasn't even an important delivery she failed to get, but she did fail and the both of them knew it, which meant the fucker could make as many demands as he wanted until she cleared her name. Even just thinking about the slave driver made her consider going back to sleep again, but she forced herself to move on and trudged over to the bathroom, absently brushing her teeth as her mind wandered over the events of the previous night. The NC Street kid she failed to kill had somehow managed to convince her to remain in contact even when he took her prize, and to her surprise he actually kept his word and called her every few days after that, just to chat. It felt naive as hell to even conceptualize, but how long has it been since she could afford a friend? She shook her head at the pathetic train of thought. The corpo rat race was exhausting, and the naive gonk that Jackie Wells was, he was surprisingly genuine in the way he acted, which gave her a tiny lifeline to pull on when she needed a break from her world. And it wasn't long before the Latino managed to convince her to use one of her few free days to spend the evening at Lizzie's. He was persistent, and she secretly enjoyed the place, even if someone of her station shouldn't be caught dead in there. And there she met them. Or him, if she was being completely honest. The little Mox had spunk, but she was ultimately just another random if loud face of NC. No, the one that truly caught her attention was her partner. How Jackie thought it was a good idea not to inform her about what was probably the only unknown FBC in Night City whom he was somehow chums with, she had no idea, but the fact that she survived trying to gut him at least spoke to his stability. Hell, she'd go so far as to say he was just as genuine and interesting to talk to as Jackie, if not for the dozens of fresh backdoors he violently shoved into her systems while they were fighting. She tried doing the same, but whatever ice monstrosity the Borg had obviously outclassed hers to a ridiculous degree, and she wasn't even a full netrunner to begin with. It was like feeding data to a black void that ripped apart anything it touched. Still, by the time she was done putting on her uniform, she was pretty sure she had expunged all of the viruses, hopefully. Reasonably sure she wasn't about to get shot for being made an unwitting mole, she left her luxurious upper-floor apartment in H12 and made her way for what was probably another 16-hour workday at the Arasaka Tower. All the while the memory of her cyberware being simply switched off, seemingly at will, refused to leave the back of her mind. The sun had barely started to rise by the time she reached the tower, the doors of the AV behind her shifting closed as the AI-driven flyer left for its next customer. She looked back at the sleek Arasaka Aerodyne with a satisfied glint in her eyes. Whenever she doubted her choices, all it took to remind her of her goals was the sheer wealth her drudgery afforded her even now. She'd keep climbing in the rat race, and one day she would be the one at the top. "Get your head back in the game, V," she whispered and schooled her expression, turning deadly serious as she marched into the tower. She ignored the guards like the mindless mooks that they were, and took great satisfaction in the cautious steps her civilian co-workers subtly took away from her as she reached the elevator, glaring a lower-ranking member of the PR unit into shuffling out before she rode her way up the immense building. The Arasaka Counterintelligence Division offices on the upper floors were dimly lit. the dark decor almost seeming to drink in the morning light, which left the entire place looking like a city at night in miniature. She ignored the jealous, calculating, or cautious looks her actual colleagues shot her as she made her way to Jenkins' office and waited for the scanning process to end. Only when the automated counter-hacking system detected nothing did she allow herself the briefest instant of relief, before clamping down on it with an iron grip. V, early as always. Arthur Jenkins, CO of Arasaka's NC Counter-Intel Division, greeted her without looking up from his computer as she entered his office. Had fun on your break? His sneer was not visible, but it was certainly audible. Yes, sir, she answered, keeping her tone carefully deferential and professional. Really? Jenkins looked up, those empty eyes pretending at amusement. You prefer slumming it with street rats to doing actual work. V's fingers went to clench into a fist, but she just barely managed to keep them from twitching. Jenkins shook his head with sad derision. I suppose a native like yourself. His lip curled slightly, can't help but feel nostalgic. He was baiting her, hoping she'd start making excuses, looking for a crack in the armor like he did for everyone working under him. She gave him none. The fake amusement in his eyes dimmed. Very well, since you are feeling so nostalgic, I have a new task for you. She spoke before she could stop herself. But what about the… Jenkins' look instantly shut her up. The Biotechnica trade will be transferred to some of my less capable subordinates. She had spent a full week on that sabotage plan. She bit the inside of her lip as she seethed, Yes, sir. Good. Jenkins smiled and took a data shard out of his computer. There is trouble brewing in Watson between the Maelstrom and our associates in the Tiger Claws. I want information on everyone involved, names, places, everything that could be of use to push Arasaka interests. He was making her do grunt work, she realized in anger. We cannot afford to operate securely on a wider scale while our own home base is on fire. Jenkins went on, as if he didn't extract enjoyment from every tiny reaction she made. So I want this done quickly and efficiently, V, and no more fuck-ups, understood? Yes, sir, she forced out. Good. Jenkins nodded. Take the shard and get to work. She was more than happy to, but still made sure to appear as outwardly calm as possible as she took her leave. Ms. V. Her assistant greeted respectfully as she entered her cubicle. I have the files you requested. We've been reassigned, Smith. She cut him off coldly as she took her seat. Get me everything you can on the Maelstrom in Watson instead. The man scowled but hid it quickly. Pathetic. Yes, ma'am. He nodded and immediately got to work. While he did that, she decided to start her own investigation on the Tiger Claw side of things. The gang was for all intents and purposes just an extension of the mega corporation, but both sides made it a point to pay lip service to their independence, which made them passable, deniable assets. And the Emperor definitely prefers it that way. Valerie thought as she finished typing out the parameters of exactly what she needed before files upon files of every single known tiger and their associates in northern North Carolina appeared before her eyes. She began scrolling through them rapidly, familiarizing herself with the subject matter before she chose where to focus her efforts, only to suddenly pause, her hand hovering slightly above her mouse as she saw something unexpected. There, within the list of Captain Isamu Okada's, or Jugo's as he was known to prefer, associates was an image taken only 2 days ago of a familiar cyborg, looming over a bowing tiger claw as another group of gangoons were carrying large packages through the mega building floor gates behind him. Her eyes narrowed and she immediately began typing out more instructions to the compiler AI, and soon her screen was covered with all the information Arasaka had on the cyborg. But all she got from it was an official Tiger Claw associate, a ripperdoc and netrunner who did a lot of work for the captain and apparently moonlighted as a mercenary for some quick cash. But why does the system have nothing on him being an FBC, she wondered, frowning. Doesn't every known model get flagged automatically no matter what? Just then, the internal tower I updated the list and more images began popping up. The program was an advanced tool available only to the more important sections of Arasaka's NC presence, and it quickly scoured the entire district's local net without drawing any attention, gathering every single mention of the name Magos. and the picture it painted was far less pleasant than just some random associate of Captain Okada. Namely that the cyborg was also a rising afterlife merc and one of the most terrifying netrunners in Night City, one with a reputation for literally dancing around other netrunners in increasingly cruel and unusual ways to troll them. She wisely ignored the fact a good number of them used the safe outcome as live practice, and to top it all of the Borg unofficially held a tiny strip of territory as well. Just how did Arasaka never hear of you then? She narrowed her eyes, scrolling through more and more mentions and images of which there were suspiciously few. No one could just appear in Night City like that. And she refused to believe he was a native who somehow got his hands on FBC tech, as well as the expertise needed to use it. She was barely a few hours into her shift, and she already had a headache. The elite netrunner obviously knew how to keep his trail properly clean, even if he inevitably failed to contain all information due to the simple density of surveillance devices spread all over Night City. But to do it to this extent, she allowed herself a moment to be genuinely impressed before she focused fully again. He might be a massive problem or an asset. An hour flew by her as she tunnel-visioned into gathering as much information as she could from the safety of her seat. And by the time she was done, she was feeling both impressed and incredibly frustrated. Except for a few known sightings during mercenary gigs and a few known non-mercenary or non-gang contacts, of whom only Dr. Victor Vector and Yoko Tsuru were notable in any way, the latter much more than the former, the cyborg was practically a ghost. She was just about to pause her research for a bit when a random memory violently inserted itself into the front of her brain. His output had called him Mike, Valerie realized, and for all the care the cyborg took with his own words, others were not so focused. And that was all the information she needed to start another round of searching, which after she lucked out and finally got a match between the 100 or so Michaels who lived in H11, eventually, after a lot of dead ends, led her down a near-comical rabbit hole of Arasaka employee backstabbing and incompetency. Apparently, the director of accounting fucked up and made his up-and-coming assistant into his fall guy, abusing company policy to reappropriate his cyberware and thus execute him on the spot without counter-intel being able to properly investigate the matter. The man was already dead, and they had better things to do with their valuable time, but a bit of usual corporate drama and backstabbing wasn't enough to draw V's attention. No, it was the apparent series of requests and bribes made by the long-dead assistant for high-level home education material for his son. Education that he should not have gotten access to without the kid signing a long-term contract. She realized with narrowed eyes but quickly waved that bit of light corruption away in favor of the real elephant in the room. The son in question was a deformed mess who never should have survived infancy, much less lived long enough to actually succeed in making use of the information. She wasn't even trying to be callous there, it was a simple and honest statement of fact. And yet Gregor Sobranov's attempts for more learning material were made at such a frequency and risk to the man that it could only ever be explained by either Gregor being an idiot, or his son being so ridiculously intelligent he blew through decades of information in mere years. And the choices of subject matter made his goals rather self-evident. V leaned back in her seat and let out a quiet exhale as all the information she gathered strung itself together into a coherent whole in her mind, and she came to the inevitable conclusion. There was someone in Night City who managed to build a fully functioning and probably high-grade cybernetic body from barely more than scrap. And he was not even 20 yet. And to think all of that was hidden from Arasaka just because the head of accounting was a lazy fat coward. She was almost tempted to laugh out loud at the sheer absurdity of it all. But the mirth left her just as quickly as it came. She knew the mess that would be caused if she were to ever share this with the rest of Arasaka, and quickly used her clearance to delete everything she had dug up from the backup files, as well as the history of her doing so. She discarded the possibility of informing Jenkins of the potential asset without bothering to think about it for more than even a second. There was no way in hell she was giving the asshole that kind of prize. Someone like Margos, or Michael Sobranov to be more exact, was likely to burn down half the city in the attempt to stay free from the heavy control Arasaka would no doubt place him under, and the megacorp would burn even more to get their hands on him. V had much more productive ideas when it came to this new golden goose. the first of which, namely, being how to ensure his presence remained hidden, and helped her deal with Jenkins' most recent attempt to humiliate her. An asset both for my current job, she considered with a look that would seem almost wistful, if not for the calculation in her eyes, and hopefully even after that. Also, for all his standoffishness, he seemed friendly enough, and she didn't want to immediately betray Jackie by proxy like that. The lunch break alert startled her from her thoughts, and she felt her everything ache under a fresh wave of fatigue. Survive first, she muttered as she inhaled another booster. Get Monster Borg to work for you later. 44, Chapter 44, A Magi's Work. Full cyberware list at the end of the chapter. Michael Magos Sobranov. The trio of lenses fitted into my new left optic narrowed in focus, the scanner suite within giving me a far more detailed picture than its predecessor as I began operating on my newest patient. My Artifex MK 1.2 Terebrous Mechadendrite whirred into position as I rapidly listed through its selection of precision titanium drills in my head, and satisfied with the second smallest one, I pressed it into the barely blooded spinal cut. No natural bone was damaged as I slowly sheared away at the slightly molten ends of the overused Sandavistan, removing the parts that were rapidly making the young man on the operating table go cyber-psycho by literally burning his synapses out from within. The last bit of molten hard plastic was pulled out by my original manipulator before my Artifex Mark 1.1 Secutor Mechadendrite moved in with its scalpels to cut away at the things I could not simply drill away, and did so perfectly. Exactly as it was designed to. Within minutes, the murderous mess of an implant was removed wholesale, and I brought out the replacement ordered by the man's parents. A simple and efficient cybernetic spine made to work specifically with his current selection of cyberware. Nothing more, nothing less. Not a particularly exciting challenge, but at least it showed the wisdom of my current customers. Unluckily for the man in question, said customers had neither the money nor the trust needed for me to break out the nanites, so I proceeded with a simpler, if equally refined process. Namely, I began knitting his nerve endings to that of the new spine with my hands and dendrites. All the while, my Oculus Mark II Oraculum optic ensured I did not miss a single connection. The work was tedious in the extreme, and yet there was nothing in this world I liked doing more. Finally, being able to focus on pursuing my craft and passion in full was beyond liberating, and the previous month had been the most restful time of my life, despite the rush of customers due go through my way. Even if I couldn't truly breathe easy before I dealt with the scare I got from the Militech gig. An issue solved by simply increasing the armoring across the entirety of my body, as well as making the isolation of my energy system far more robust than it was previously. And then adding redundancy to top it all off, because the threat of death was for meat. And meat I was not. Only when I finished designing and fabricating my new heart, the Core Mark II Fulgur, a previously tiny circulatory organ and now a full backup generator that could restart my entire power system within less than a second, did I begin actually letting myself relax in truth, despite the threats lurking on all sides, just waiting for the time to pounce. More and more fights were breaking out all across Watson, and multiple raids had been conducted by the rogue elements of both the Tigers and Maelstrom. But neither side wanted to be the first to make the big move, and so their conflict remained relatively cold. This was not a threat to my life per se, but definitely one to my peace, even if the constant stream of profit from my Tiger Claw contacts made me practically swim in eddies. The threat that actually intimidated me came from the Tiger's own bosses, namely from within the massive tower looming over the heart of Night City, Arasaka. When the demon I had burrowed deep inside V's OS pinged me about her snooping, I was sorely tempted to simply wreak havoc all over their systems without a care about the consequences to the woman in question and be done with the whole issue. I knew without a doubt that she would at the very least die for the crime of inconveniencing the megacorp, but I found that at the moment I did not particularly care. She was the one to poke the sleeping bear, and thus had to bear the consequences of that choice. My hand was stopped in the last second when she failed to actually press the issue, and instead hid the information about me while giving me a perfect in to outright delete all of it without drawing attention by piggybacking her clearance codes. I, of course, had to delta from the tower's systems immediately after that, as the shackled AI they had watching over the place was beyond terrifying, and I wanted nothing to do with those things. Making things blow up in her face would have been the safer option, but I was no thankless coward, despite her less than honest motivations, and one good turn deserved another. I suppose time would tell with her, and I'd hopefully not have to tell Jackie about frying his tomb, even if it gave me a fresh source of worry I could have really done without. Aside from plotting and working on my craft, I did not stop doing mercenary work, even if I did greatly reduce the amount of gigs I did to something more reasonable by normal mercenary standards. Regina Jones had no worthy gigs for me. What with my connection to one of the sides of the conflict, she was no doubt greatly profiting from at the moment, and so most of the jobs I did directly for Rogue. Of course, expecting another big job like the Militech heist was utterly idiotic, as gigs like that were exceedingly rare even at the highest echelons, and instead she had me going on the usual edge-runner grind of stealing, killing, threatening, and coercing my way into a quick payday. Except I was paid much better for it this time, at the cost of some discretion in how I did things. Besides, Mother said I shouldn't coop myself up in my workshop all the time, and cleaning up scav filth from the streets was good for the soul. And admittedly, shooting up scum with Rebecca was always fun. Had to get her out of the house somehow, lest she become a true couch potato, even if her chipper ways tended to bring up Mom's mood most of the time. She liked that damn big TV more than I did at this point, and the collection of old movies I got was not helping. Shaking my head, I finished attaching the final nerve cluster and began scanning the patient to make sure everything was in order, before grabbing a large syringe from a nearby shelf with my mechadendrite and inserting it in the back of his neck. The scans showed the expected reaction, and I allowed my focus to dim and addressed my guest. So, thoughts? Beside me, Vic rubbed his chin and whistled, "Haven't seen things done this way for decades," and then eyed my mechadendrites, the tips of which were currently going through their cleaning cycle in a nearby sink, while I kept observing the startup of the boosted healing just in case. The new ways are less invasive and far more time-efficient, true. I nodded along, but they are also less precise, and I don't like imperfection in my work. The veteran Ripper chuckled, "So long as you know what you are doing, kid." The flat look I directed him with told him all I thought about that. He shook his head before turning serious and looking pointedly at my back. "You sure those things are safe, Mike?" He asked slowly. "You know inhuman cybernetics aren't done for good reason." Said reasons being the supposed detachment from humanity they induced, and thus leading into inevitable descent to cyberpsychosis. "And you know," I countered without looking, "that I was never particularly attached to my humanity to begin with. Vic." He frowned and crossed his arms, worry clear on his face. Rising my free hand to forestall his response, I added, "Besides, they are controlled by subroutines I spent days programming and weeks perfecting. Their pressure on my actual neural network is minimal, and I don't keep them active at all times." "I still don't like it," the veteran Ripperdoc said after considering my words only briefly. "Do you take them off from time to time at least?" Done wiping my hand with gauze and pure alcohol, I pointed at the thin backpack-like implant hidden under my coat. "It is made to be easily removable, but I've seen no need to do that so far." Went unsaid was that I did think about removing them whenever I was with Rebecca, but she seemed not to mind them at all, so I just kind of forgot about the whole idea after the first time. "Good." Vic nodded. "From now on, I want you to remove them every time you go to sleep." "But—" "No buts, Michael," he said in his doctor voice. "You know damn well that believing you can take all the chrome load in existence is just asking to have it blow up on you at the worst possible moment." His voice turned less stern as he looked me in the eyes. "You are a bright kid, and even if you think you know you can keep going like this indefinitely, why risk it?" We stared at each other for a long moment, but it was ultimately I who broke first. "Why indeed?" I muttered while looking away before slowly sighing. "I suppose I've just come to accept them as part of myself. And the thought of wearing them like clothes seems odd, even if I know you are right." "Well then," Vic smirked lightly, "it is a good thing you have more self-control than to fall for something as simple as that, right?" Thankfully, I was able to hold down my wince. "Yeah, right." Of course I do. Damn it. Good. He nodded in satisfaction, a brief flash of relief in his eyes. Now if only all my other patients were as good as listening to what I tell them. Smiling wryly in turn, I shook my head, but said nothing. There was a good reason I still talked to him about my work from time to time, despite being infinitely more knowledgeable about the depths of cybercraft than he was. Sometimes you just couldn't beat experience, and as much as I disliked the meddling, I knew damn well he was right. A light groan drew my attention back to the patient whose anesthetics were supposed to last at least 10 seconds longer than that, and I quickly noted down to account for the surprisingly large effect such little change in mass had on the dosage. Don't move just yet, I told the slowly awakening Asian man, eyes open. Good, follow my hand, please. The doors to my workshop slid open as I pushed the wheelchair-bound man outside. The sole person waiting for him in the hallway I had recently refurbished into a proper waiting room, standing up with wide, hopeful eyes. She quickly schooled her expression when she saw me looking, though, and calmly approached the young man, crouching in front of him and resting her hands on the sides of his dazed face. Seeing his muted reaction, she looked up to me questioningly, but not quite threateningly just yet. Peace, Shimizu-san, I said before she could throw some stupid accusation at me that I'd be obligated to throw back. He is still drowsy from the medication, but I assure you that the operation was a complete success. Yeah, the man rasped. I'll be fine, Carson, don't worry. Hush, you foolish boy, she snapped and then visibly held back a barrage of other choice words for her less-than-wise progeny, waving for me to follow her some distance away from the patient. She held her emotions down with respectable competence as she spoke up. How bad is the damage, really? He was lucky to end up in that shootout when he did, I said, making her scowl. That Sandevistan was of poor quality to begin with, obsolete decades ago, and whoever installed it did a competent but rushed job, which just exacerbated the whole thing, and that is without mentioning the overuse. The old woman bit out a curse in Japanese, no doubt naming the man that was likely soon to be murdered Ripper, before focusing back on me with a cool tint to her voice. Continue. Almost forgot this hag was a tiger as well, I thought wryly. His overuse of the Sandevistan has already strained his nerves dangerously, and while I can guarantee that my replacement will cause no further strain, and even ease that of the rest of his implants, the damage already done to his system is not easy to remove. I see, she frowned. How will it affect him? Good, at least she isn't raging against me like an idiot. I thanked my lucky stars I didn't have to deal with that again. Only his reflexes are certain to be permanently weakened, while the mind itself will suffer only minor consequences. Loss of attention span and short-term memory issues are the most probable with this kind of damage. At least he won't end up a complete idiot like his father, she muttered. Your recommendation for further treatment? The third line of Arasaka's subsidiary Kyushu Biolab's neural booster, Serenity. I listed off, while uploading a full list of lesser recommendations to her agent. They are not likely to keep production going for much longer, as the components are too expensive to be profitable enough. But it has shown the best results with this kind of issue. Went unsaid was the fact that neural damage was, aside for some very specific circumstances, for all intents and purposes, permanent. You could treat it, but not cure it. Or so common wisdom claimed. That damn corp will drain us dry, I know it. She clicked her tongue and ever so lightly inclined her head. But I suppose I can't have my last son living like an idiot. You have my thanks for your work, Mago-san. An infusion of €300,000 fell neatly into my account a moment later. You can tell Jugo-sama that he has my support, she added almost as an afterthought. Holding down my annoyance at the fact that was not my fucking job, I simply nodded and did my best to smile. I've sent you a basic physical recovery regime. You can bring your son back at any time for a checkup if any fresh issues pop up. Or you just want to be sure. Have a pleasant rest of your day. The old woman nodded and left to rejoin her son, leaving my clinic and bringing the 4 Tiger Claw escorts loitering outside with her. It was irritating, letting them skulk around the place, but biz was biz, and bitching about it would be pathetic. Finally done with your customers? Vic called from the workshop. Yeah, that's it for the day. I called back, you finally done gawking. Kid, The Ripperdocs' response was one of utter exasperation. If anyone else saw what you have hidden in here, they'd do much worse than gawk. Good. 2 hours later, having said goodbye to Vic after he spent most of the day touring my new workspace and giving his recommendations on what to add or remove, I was just about to call it a day when I saw a reminder pop up on my agent. Holding down a groan at having totally forgotten my meeting with Yoko, I took a seat in my workshop proper and activated my cyberdeck. Uploading, my mind felt as smooth and liberating as ever, and soon enough I was hurtling through the fake cyberspace and towards the EdgeNet cafe, where upon entering I immediately drew dozens of curious and cautious glances. That were vastly outnumbered by the excited ones. Here we go again. Maggie-chan, you finally remembered your poor old senpai. Wasn't it sensei last time? The far too fucking cheerful voice of the old-ass fox made me wish to be forced into humiliating another bunch of over-eager gonks playing at net running again instead. And that was after the act had become nothing but a chore. But sadly, I gave my word, and so here I was. Hello, Yoko. Mao. And thus the ritual continued as foretold. It is almost like you don't like me, Maggie-chan. What could have possibly given you that idea? I deadpanned and pinched the bridge of my digital nose as she went to answer, "That was fucking rhetorical, Yoko." And of course, that only made the little shit giggle. All right, all right. She raised her hands in surrender as I went to bonk her hard enough her actual head would feel it. I do have some actual biz to discuss. Oh. Took you long enough, you insane hag. I've heard about your fresh little setup in H11, she said as we walked over to a booth. Don't think you are drawing too much attention by working so openly. I'm not selling anything military grade or to anyone who enters for that matter. For now, and the tigers are good for their word. For now again. Her avatar gave me a calculating look that said, I don't believe you for 1 second, but I guess that is the best I am getting. Well, as much as I'd like to scold you like a proper senpai should. The eye under my hood twitched. I'd like to make use of your services today. You? I looked her over, both here and elsewhere. Or someone else. Just a middleman today, Maggie-chan. Don't get too excited. She waved me down playfully. Come on, I'll introduce you. We passed through a wall of security code and came upon a delightfully designed traditional Japanese booth where 2 other avatars were seated and waiting for us. And I had already met one of them. As promised, Yoko began introductions. You've already met. Kiwi, was it? I interrupted, looking the competent, I supposed, Netrunner's icon over. The avatar showed nothing, save for a subtle stutter in her signal, Magos. She greeted back coolly. Ah, yes. Yoko smirked teasingly, annoyingly. You two did make quite an impression on each other, didn't you? As one, both Kiwi and I groaned. Before she could so much as twitch, I uploaded an ad spam virus to the Fox Menace. I'll be good, I promise, she blurted out quickly. I pulled back the demon and directed her with a narrow-eyed stare. Kiwi relaxed back into her seat. Who is the other one? I asked after a sufficiently awkward silence. She is the one I set this up for, Kiwi said instead of Yoko. She has some unique chrome installed. Experimental or black-boxed? I asked immediately, calm professionalism disappearing behind a flash of excitement. Immediately, I started working some of my more subtle hacks around the new arrival. Kiwi's avatar tilted its head as it shot the other one a look and promptly ignored her annoyance as she gave me the answer, yes. Now you have my attention. But best not let my excitement get the better of me again. That kind of thing will not come cheap. I said after pretending to consider it for more than a split second, but I am more than willing and capable of taking the contract. At the mention of a contract, Kiwi seemed to ease a bit more, though her contact's reaction was the exact opposite. I don't need some random runner in my head, Kiwi. The other one scowled, foolishly bringing the conversation outside a private channel. My chrome is perfectly fine, and it will stay perfectly fine. Kiwi's calm disappeared behind a scowl, and I could tell she was already regretting some things. And I told you. She turned to her contact. That I won't waste time mentoring someone who can blow up at any moment. I nodded in agreement. It was the smart thing to do. Maggie-chan has quite the ironclad rep in our circles of Night City. Yoko spoke up, confirming the other netrunner was an outsider. I personally guarantee his discretion. The second netrunner scowled and finally decided to use her brain for once as she started a silent conversation with Kiwi, and after a brief minute of frowning and glaring, she sighed and looked back at me. All right, fine. I made sure not to appear patronizing as I nodded at the expected outcome. Care to finally introduce yourself then? Lucy, she said, flashing a glare. Just Lucy. Good, now I can keep pretending I didn't just hack everything there is to know about you directly from your head. That experimental cyberdeck was very interesting indeed. Very well then, Just Lucy. I nodded, and ignoring her scowl, turned to the one actually in charge. Now let's talk eddies. New stuff is bolded. Cerebrum MK Viens Biopod. Full technological interface, seamless connection drive, heavy-duty armoring, cerebrospinal fluid reoxidizer, neural link, EMP nullifier. Umbra MK, 1 cyberdeck, 20 terabytes RAM, high-speed processor, direct net interface, self-black ice, emergency heatsink. Draco MK Viens Cyberjaw, shredding dentures, overclock heat expulsion sink, vocalizer. Oculus MK Viens Optique R, 16,000 display, 8 times zoom, mark function, informational interface. Oculus MK Divi Oraculum Optic L, Mulet Spectrum 3 sensor array. Auris MK 1 audio receptor. Narcissus MK 1 olfactory receptor. Thorax MK Viens Puncts, Viens Torso. Cyberlungs 12-hour reserve, Cyberheart. False marrow, redundant circulatory system, heavy plating, gallus, titanium skeleton, myoma plastic musculature. Core MK2 Fulgur. Cyberheart, circulatory system, highly stable redundant power system, EMP resetter. Deverator MK Viens generator, biogenerator, high filtration cyber stomach, reserve battery. Vulcanus MK1 nanoforge, metal processing plant, nanite production printer, reserve processor. Manibus MK Viens Puncts, Viens cyberarm, dense myomoplastic musculature, heavy plating. Pedes MK2, venator, cyberleg, myomoplastic musculature, medium armor plating, lynx paws, high-power cyber tendons. Artifex MK Viens mécadendrite implant, external limb software, vertebral harmonizer, external manual manipulator. Artifex MK Viens comat, Viens secutor, mécadendrite, external scalpel manipulator. Artifex MK Viens comats divi terebrus, mécadendrite, external drill manipulator. 45, Chapter 45, Interesting Customers. The runner. For the nth time this morning, she found herself questioning her decision to stay put with her new mentor, nervously fiddling with her sleeves as she watched Kiwi flick something to the tiger claw guard, whose eyes glowed briefly before her entire demeanor shifted and she simply twitched her head for them to pass. Pays to have an in with the knee breakers, her mentor commented, sounding almost impressed as they entered the oddly subdued mega-building floor. Kiwi's eyes narrowed for a brief instant before the older woman silently kept walking, which only served to make Lucy curious as she activated her cyberdeck and made a brief surface-level scan of the area, revealing an almost unnaturally clean local net. It revealed absolutely nothing wrong, but she couldn't shake off the slightly ominous feeling the odd calm gave her. It was almost like she was back there, staring at the B-. Best not think about that now. She shook her head back into focus. Kiwi shot her a warning look, and she quickly caught up to her, still on guard. The older netrunner was still an enigma for Lucy. Ever since she escaped Arasaka, she had made sure not to stay at one place for too long, and to not get attached to anyone who might drag her back to that prison, but the moment she made too much noise while hacking an apartment and drew Kiwi's attention, she found she couldn't reject the curious woman's offer of mentorship. She had been alone for so long, she clutched the offer like a lifeline, even if her repeated reminders of never trusting anyone in Night City were getting a bit old. Everything seemed to be going fine for those few weeks, but then one day while they were practicing monitoring some kind of disturbance at Militech, they had to emergency disconnect and her cyberdeck glitched out, and Kiwi immediately began insisting she have it looked at. Of course, she understood that ignoring the state of neural cyberware was a gonk-fucking move. But who in Night City of all places was she supposed to trust with her obviously stolen corpo tech? A ripper would sell her out just as quickly as they'd help her, and probably take the paycheck for both. Kiwi didn't let up though, which is how they ended up approaching a thoroughly clean storefront on the edge of the 16th floor of Mega Building H11, an unobtrusive red sign of Ars Magos Mechanica hanging right above the doorway. The Latin words immediately screamed corpo at her, but she somehow managed to keep her unease from showing. They were left to wait at the entrance briefly as the well-hidden camera in the doorframe scanned them, before they were let into a well-appointed waiting area. Once more, as Kiwi began approaching the door, Lucy instinctively activated her cyberdeck, only to completely fail to contain the dumbfounded face she made at what she found. The whole subnet made her feel like she was suffocating. Her presence in the net confined to a tiny passage surrounded on all sides by demons she couldn't even begin to identify, just waiting for an excuse to fry her alive. "Come in." She very nearly missed the synthetic voice coming from the other room, and when she followed Kiwi in, still dazed and still very much staring at the subnet, she made the mistake of looking at the netrunner/ripper they were here to meet. The familiar red-robed icon stared directly back at her, the eerie blackness of pure nothing surrounding it briefly feeling as if it were going to incinerate her on the spot. And then the icon winked, and she felt herself be ejected from cyberspace. It all happened so quickly, all she could do was stand there and stare like an idiot. Kiwi's rebreather did nothing to hide her irritated scowl. Apologies for that. No matter, I do tend to draw that kind of reaction. The utterly dry voice of the, he was actually a full cyborg, fuck. Besides, Magos went on, both her hardware and software are quite impressive. A bit of refinement and she might just end up being competent. He tilted his head. Maybe. Kiwi nodded along as if it were the most obvious thing in the world, which just served to piss her off further, really. Excuse me? Why the fuck were they talking about her like she wasn't even there? You are excused. The cyborg's voice turned dry again as he pointed an open hand at a factory-new Ripperdoc chair. Take a seat, please. Lucy felt most of her fear disappear behind sheer annoyance as she crossed her arms and glared at him. To her utter embarrassment, Kiwi let out the quietest sigh at her behavior, and when the Borg turned to look at her questioningly, she, for the first time in forever, sounded pleading. Just get in the chair, Lucy. Thrown off guard by the sudden shift, all she could do was crumble and do as she was asked, hesitantly strolling over to the increasingly looming and inhuman cyborg, clenching her teeth and forcing her reasonable fear down as she made herself as comfortable as she could on the operating chair. Good. The Borg nodded, not even bothering to acknowledge her as anything other than subject matter, and promptly pulled a personal link from his arm, slotting it into the back of her neck without so much as a "by your leave." Had a brush with a Black Ice AI? He asked after 3 seconds that felt like an eternity. Yes. Kiwi answered for her. Something riled Militech up recently, so they were on guard when we paid them a visit. Mm-hmm. Magos hummed neutrally before addressing her. Your cyberdeck is surprisingly intact. You brushed an AI and only burned your connections by a sub-percentile, which, while not worrying, should still be given timely replacements before the damage spreads to your actual synapses. Isn't that normal? Lucy asked, ignoring the odd numbing sensation in the back of her neck. Let me give you some advice for free as your current physician. Magos said seriously, neural injuries do not heal, they scab. Even Kiwi twitched at the choice of words. But, the cyborg went on, as if he hadn't just reminded them of the small bit of brain death they suffered with each fuck-up. This amount of damage is nowhere near enough for you to start getting visual glitches, and the rest of your cyberware has nothing to do with it either. Knowing where this was going, Lucy felt her blood go cold. So, she licked her suddenly dry lips. What is it? This is Arasaka Tech, he said bluntly, making her tense. Proprietary, experimental, Arasaka Tech. Unsure of what else to say, Lucy could only nod jerkily. Well, whatever you brushed at the Militech spot you were staking out activated some of your backup programs. His voice turned almost excited. And Arasaka tends to place a lot of recording software in their experiments, some more than others. Lucy really did not like where this was going. And this experiment just so happens to be designed for Blackwall deep dives. The fucking giddy cyborg said the freaks probably recorded each and every catastrophic failure in full. Enough, Kiwi interrupted, to Lucy's immense relief and gratitude. Can you help her or not? Oh, the cyborg blinked, as if shaken awake. Of course, I already wiped the program in its entirety and replaced the scuffed nerve connections. I just felt she should know this. He, or something Lucy just couldn't catch in her state, reached over for a nearby computer and ejected a chip. Margos put it in one of Lucy's pockets and stepped away, just a second before she felt a sudden sharp sting in the back of her neck that dulled almost instantly. Did he just operate on you while chatting away? The cyborg finished just a bit smugly. I wonder. Despite everything, Lucy couldn't help but make another irritated scowl. All the recordings are on that chip, as well as the program itself. Naturally, he completely ignored her. There were no remote activation or deactivation programs installed, probably to stop the Blackwall from shutting you down on approach. He huffed and continued. So aside from the obvious Arasaka code you got for your operating system, you are pretty much clean. Just like that? She found herself muttering. Did he have any idea what he just did? Just like what? Margos tilted his head, cutting off her train of thought. I'll have you know that I take my work very seriously. And seeing her dumbfounded expression, he added, and your payment is more than enough for services rendered. Of course, in the end, all the Borg really wanted was to look at the damn cyberdeck. She knew that the massive discount they got for letting him give it a thorough look was the only reason they could even afford him, but she still felt like some kind of animal at a super-rich corpo exhibit. It was stupid and emotional and stupid, but she just couldn't help it. And it must have shown on her face, because the look the Borg directed her with was one usually reserved for particularly underdeveloped children. You really going to get protective over Arasaka's tech now? Well, when he put it that way, the cyborg shook his head and turned to Kiwi. I have some time remaining, and you look like you haven't had a proper checkup in a while. We don't have unlimited eddies. She responded simply, eyes still trailing over Lucy with a complicated look. The deck was more interesting than I expected. Margos shrugged. The back and forth went on for a while longer as Lucy realized she was supposed to get up now, and did so while feeling an odd sense of clarity in her movements, and before long she was seated nearby while Margos was detaching Kiwi's visor, revealing the complex pit of machinery below. Oh, and Ms. Kiwi, Margos said as he began wire brushing one of the more clogged air filters. Just make sure your employer doesn't get too curious with his snooping, yeah? The cyborg said almost disinterestedly. That outcome would be downright unfortunate. The sight of Kiwi's half-face going deathly pale was something Lucy would not be able to forget anytime soon. Michael Margos Sobranov, the instant the duo left my clinic, I couldn't help but do a fist pump, fuck yes. I grinned and hopped like a little kid on Christmas. That damn cyberdeck was a treasure trove of information, and while a massive chunk of it was filled with tacked-on redundancies and inefficiencies almost natural to those bound to meet, it was evident it incorporated the best Arasaka could come up with around 5 years ago. Give or take. It was obviously updated over time. The fact she evaded being retrieved for so long made Lucy seem just slightly more impressive than her initial impression did. Or it would have if not for the whole recording software going unnoticed for so long thing. It didn't necessarily have to mean anything, but one could not help but suspect foul play whenever things like escaped corpo child experiments with unknown tech in their heads got involved. But, child experiment or not, for all my skill and knowledge, I simply did not have the time and resources to throw into the proverbial grinder that Arasaka's teams did. So, for all that I knew for a fact I was better than all of them, quantity was a quality of its own, and they had already given me a veritable feast of inspiration for my next Cyberdeck's iteration with their competent if still subpar work. Did the fact that a bunch of children who were suspiciously similar to myself before my transformation died to improve on the design sour things for me? Admittedly, yes. Was it going to stop me from using the knowledge gleaned from their unwilling sacrifice? Fuck no. They were not me, nor were they close to me. which meant they did not truly matter. Even if a small part of me hoped pre-crash I couldn't actually steal souls, and they were in a better place now. Why, the simple efficiency upgrades I could come up with off the top of my head made it tempting to just lock myself in my workshop for 3 days straight and just tinker away like a maniac. In fact, of course, this was exactly when my Tiger Claw liaison decided it'd be fucking hilarious to shoot me a call, and for all my irritation, I was mostly obligated to answer. Magos. Yes? I asked, failing to filter out all of my irritation from my tone. The woman on the other end of the call wilted slightly. Gangun-chan, there has been a change concerning Maelstrom. Jugo-sama plans on holding a meeting later today and invites you to join him now for matters of security. Matters of security? I muttered in brief confusion. He knew I only needed minutes to set myself up perfectly. Ah, I snapped my fingers. Crazy fucker probably wants to ask me for favors and can't appear to be trusting me more than his own lieutenants. Fucking politics. Fine. I answered after the brief silence. How soon does he need me? The captain said it wasn't an emergency, but he'd prefer if you came up quickly. I'll make haste then, I said. Not waiting for her response, I ended the call and began rapidly ordering my clinic up, while signaling the sign to mark me as closed on the outside. Moments later, I was in the waiting room/hallway, and knowing I'd be out for a while, I paused before deciding to take my time and walked up to the upper level of my new home. Hey. I waved at Mum, who was doing some knitting of all things in the living room. I'm going out for a bit. Want me to grab you something on the way back? She looked up at me as whatever she was attempting to knit together fell apart. More synth wool, please, she said with false cheer, pointedly ignoring the pile of scuffed fabrics tossed around the couch she was sat on. Misty had recommended she try something like this, and it was definitely going. I hid a wince. Get right on that. Sorry for interrupting. Her smile turned genuine at that, and she nodded. Just be careful at work, Mikey. Sure thing, Mum. I'll make sure to not trust the literal gangsters I work with. I deadpanned. The annoyed look she gave me made me hop out of the room just a touch faster. The doors to my room opened up to reveal a dark, near-lightless cave and a small pile of blankets with an improvised viewing port at the top. Still binging that trash? I asked, amused. You take that back, mister. The blankets were launched back to reveal Rebecca, who was pointing an accusatory finger at me. The Bushido anime is 10 times better than the movies. And yet, 10 times the shit will still remain shit. I spoke the absolute truth. She faux glared. You haven't even watched it yet. You are just a hater. Yes. I agreed without an ounce of hesitation as I sat down next to her, wisely not pointing out I did in fact watch the whole thing. Days worth of filler included. Most of the fucking tigers can't go 10 minutes without making a reference. It is driving me insane. Serves you right for working with those gonks. She grinned teasingly. I knew my partnership with the gang annoyed her more than she showed, but she didn't let it get between us. She understood why I did it, and even agreed, but that didn't stop her from poking at it whenever she could. Wait, she said suddenly, drawing me from my thoughts. If you never watched the anime, how do you get all their references enough to annoy you? I paused before quickly looking away. I had a phase. Pfaft, she snorted before breaking out into full-blown laughter. Oh, you are so binging this shit with me now. But I already watched it. I most assuredly did not whine. Too late, she sing-songed. It is already decided. My eyes narrowed, whereupon she mimed some pretty convincing arguments to the contrary. Fine, I accepted my fate with all the due reluctance. But, nah, she interrupted, no getting out of it now. I have a meeting. I said firmly, an important one. We can watch it later. Her cheer dimmed considerably and her shoulders slumped a bit. Tigers again, she asked. Yeah. I nodded. Something big is coming up and I need to be there. She bit her lip slightly and looked away. She shook her head and looked back at me with, just don't let the fuckers drag you down to their level, yeah? Yeah, I nodded, exhaling as I looked away. I won't. Ignoring the flash of memories of all I had done for the gang by simple association that stubbornly refused to remain buried. 46. Chapter 46, Scheming Tiger. Michael Margos Sobronov. Margot-san. The bandana-wearing Tiger Claw nodded lightly as I approached her and the empty mega-building elevator. Naturally, I settled on my usual greeting, Gangun-chan. She twitched, still embarrassed but not so utterly terrified of me to try and hide it again. Not that she suddenly turned stupid enough to not treat me with due caution, we were simply used to each other by now. Comfort tended to do that, I've learned, lull you into a sense of security even when faced with something dangerous, so long as the danger was persistent. It was a survival mechanism, and an utterly insidious one at that. I stopped my hand from moving to my necklace and gave the woman a quick once-over, immediately noticing the bags under her eyes. Hard day? Briefly, she seemed to startle, before her shoulders slumped a bit. Yeah. I voiced, guessing the mess with Maelstrom isn't all that fun for the rank and file. Her face twisted in a way that indicated she was scowling below the bandana. Most of the gonks are excited for some action. Folding my arms, I leaned against the elevator wall. Don't count yourself among that number. Not all of us are eager to get into a shootout with a bunch of cyber psychos. She tisked before she realized what she said, and her eyes widened in panic. I am of course going to fight if ordered. Relax, I waved her down. I have better things to do than snitch to Jugo about your lack of devotion. The tone I used for the last bit made it plain what I thought of such things. The poor woman's shoulders slumped and she mumbled a quiet thanks. Doubt he will be sending you out anyway. I shrugged and she immediately perked up. You are useful where you are now and you haven't fucked up much. Her relief was immediately replaced with embarrassment. That was one time. She muttered, "Heh heh heh." I couldn't help but chuckle, no doubt thanking whatever god she prayed to for having most of her face covered. She looked away and grumbled. Still, I asked a bit more seriously this time, how good are your chums at fighting the psycho cult really? For all her airheadedness, she seemed to be one of the more sensible members of the local tigers, and so, as one might expect, my question made her frown, eyes turning dark. Most of the upper ranks with proven skills and good chrome can fight them on equal terms. She said, but the majority of the gonks are either too stupid or too under-equipped, so all they can really do is rely on numbers to bring the less chromed-out maelstrommers down. The rest, she trailed off before looking away and jerkily shrugging her shoulders. Clicking my tongue at the mental image, I couldn't help but ask, and your bosses aren't doing anything to change that? No tactics or weapon updates? I couldn't really expect Jugo to chrome them out, but at least he could arm them. Burias were relatively cheap, right? We are a gang, Margot-san. Senko shook her head, an odd look on her face. Not some corpo security squad. The captain knows where to put us when he needs to, but sometimes the Strommers just don't give us the choice. And, she added morbidly, a lot of the gonks that get flatlined usually kill themselves by trying to act out their favorite Bushido scene, while being shot at, so there is just no saving some people. Giving her a bemused look, I remembered my previous conversation with Rebecca and snorted, well, I can fix a lot of things, but there is simply no cure for being a gonk. Ha! Her quiet bark of laughter carried quite a bit of bitterness to it, and she turned silent. She probably lost someone in that exact way, with how these things usually go. I concluded and did not press further. The rest of our ride to the upper floors was spent in silence. The manor-sized dojo and home of the Okadas was still just as impressive as the first time I visited, though the obvious tension made the atmosphere quite a bit less pleasant. I had been back here all of 3 times since first being invited, and only at the most ungodly hours possible, as I didn't want to deal with the Tiger Claw rank and file gawking at me while Jugo's swordmaster, yes, that was his actual title in the gang, gave me a few pointers. Cranky old shit liked to complain, but I was serious enough about what little practice I got, in that he soon started lamenting I was not dedicating myself to the way of the blade in full instead. Even the old men in the gang just couldn't help themselves, it seemed. It wasn't like I was particularly talented with the weapon anyways. My hand-eye coordination was simply that superior to most others, it simply appeared as if I was. Though still getting thrashed by the coot repeatedly despite that fact, reminded me I'd need to come up with some form of optimized muscle memory subroutine if I wanted to develop any kind of real cybernetic martial art, instead of relying on the shitty meat version. Their style was still solid, mind. Adapted to the use of cyberware over time, and the fact it was generally widespread amongst the upper ranks of the tigers meant it had to be doing something right. But they simply did not have the same upper hardware limit I did, and optimizing was rarely a waste of time. Should probably get my hands on a heavier weapon too. Even after all this time, my katana still felt flimsy in my grip, like it wanted to snap with each swing I made, despite me knowing for a fact it wouldn't. An act that would doubtless make old man Takeda and Jugo cry tears of blood, but that was a sacrifice I was willing to make. But that was for future Michael to worry about. The dozen of reasonably alert mid-ranking tigers on guard around the dojo all tensed as I entered. The duo currently sparring, pausing their moves immediately and twisting to face me with their guards up. "Gentlemen," I greeted, still perfectly at ease. A beat passed as we stared each other down, my hand ever so slowly leaning against the grip of my own sword. Not fast enough to threaten, but visibly enough to emphasize. The two sparring partners lowered their weapons and the others started to relax a bit. Senko, who was still next to me, letting out a relieved breath despite knowing nothing would actually happen here. The leader of the guard detail, a man that looked like a mix between a biker and a neo-samurai with his leather jacket and the red menpo covering his face, grunted part in recognition, part in annoyance at seeing me, and simply said in heavily accented English, "Captain is waiting for you." Nodding, I wordlessly passed the small group by, my escort still on my heels, and entered the mansion proper. Before we got to the balcony where Jugo was waiting, Senko stopped in her tracks. "I'll wait here." "That's—" I trailed off briefly before nodding, probably for the best. She was relatively high-ranked, having actual underlings of her own, but if she ended up overhearing something she shouldn't, that would just bring unneeded heat on her head. The setting sun painted the view in a beautiful orange as I stepped out into the open, revealing the scene of Jugo sitting next to his wife, the two of them staring into the distance while a couple of their guards watched on from hidden spots nearby. Already stretched so thin, I wondered. I wasn't given too much time to ponder it, as I was almost immediately noticed by the tiger boss, who quickly waved me over. "Michael-san." Akari Okada greeted me first. "It is good to have you back." "My thanks for your hospitality as always, Akari-san." I damn near recited back. The woman smiled at me playing along and stood up. "I will go and make you two some tea." I simply remained standing behind Jugo, who was still staring into the distance for a while as she left. She insisted on staying. He answered my unspoken question. Jin is visiting family in Japan, though. There was no debating that. "Is that really smart? Letting her stay, I mean," I asked. "You try telling her no when she puts her foot down." He chuckled and waved me forward again. "Come on, sit." Shrugging my shoulders, I did as he asked and took a seat on the actual wooden bench before getting a look at the man in question. The skin of his face was wrinkled in a way that spoke of both a lot of grins and frowns in recent days, and while the grins were completely expected from the madman, actual concern was not. Naturally, all of my worry died a rapid death as I finished scanning the rest of his face and found his eyes sparkling with his personal brand of barely contained mad excitement. "What did you do?" I asked, holding back a sigh. His flat expression immediately twisted into a grin. "What could you possibly mean?" "Jugo." I said, "If you don't tell me what you did right now, I'll tell your wife you are planning on doing something stupid." His rising amusement vanished as he completely stilled and slowly turned to fully look at me. "You wouldn't." "Try me." I deadpanned. The man pretended to be scared for a brief moment longer before finally huffing in amusement and shaking his head. "Don't worry, I don't plan on keeping you in the dark." Taking a final sip of his cold drink, he began, "Shobo and I have been biding our time, gathering intel and letting the soldiers have their fun before deciding where to press Maelstrom into backing down. Find a good spot, blow it up," he explained as if discussing the weather, followed by a few raids across the rest of their territory, grab a few of them off the streets, spread fear, the usual. Not a terribly complex plan. Simple did not mean bad after all. I nodded along. What changed? "Power Pump contacted us," he says, his grin threatening to split his face. My face twisted into an annoyed scowl. Some of the names the Maelstromers picked were truly creative. Their leader, I asked. Jugo frowned. How can you not already know? Maelstrom also changes bosses like I change coats, and I have better things to think about. I shrugged and pointed at him before he could respond. Or are you going to tell me there ever was a period in the gang where their leaders lasted over a few years tops? Ha, he laughed before pointing at me. True, but you should still inform yourself just in case. Yeah. I nodded. He wasn't exactly wrong there. So what did Power Pump want? A meeting in 2 days, Jugo said, between us leaders, a negotiation for peace. You do know that is a fucking trap, right? I deadpanned. Of course. He nodded flatly before his more jovial expression returned, and he spread his arms like a preacher. But think, my dear street samurai, if he went through so much effort to set it all up, how can I so rudely miss the chance to set it all on fire? So what? You want to ambush the ambusher? I asked, not exactly against the idea. Exactly. He snapped his fingers before leaning in conspiratorially, and if it just so happens, my dear comrade at arms Jotaro Shobo ends up a smear on the ground, an unfortunate one with his chrome agonizingly burned out from the inside, by say a rogue maelstrommer netrunner. Ah, so much for his vaunted truce. Well, Jugo shrugged innocently. I'd be very sad to lose a comrade of his standing, but we all can only hope to die for our glorious brotherhood. Right, I said dryly, and are you sure your forces can take the maelstrom down? What if you fail, and all you end up doing is making the gang war even worse? What if you die? An irritating part of me wanted to ask. The gang war will get worse no matter what we do. Jugo shrugged the question off, seemingly without a care. I'm not so stupid as to expect cutting the head of the snake will make the rest of it die. But it will give us an advantage. My eyes narrowed, and what makes you think I want to be anywhere near your little suicide run against the maelstrom now that I am doing actual work? Especially since it will just escalate things. I may have told him I wouldn't backstab him, a bit of a redundant statement in retrospect, but this went way beyond that. Because, Mike, even if we weren't already allies, he said pointedly, not even registering the implied betrayal like his guards did, we Tiger Claws are by far your better option when your alternative is Maelstrom. At least we know not to poke the sleeping bear that is Night Corp by bringing our shit to their mega buildings. We both had to suppress shivers at what happened to the last bunch of gonks who decided to blow out the side of a mega building. Maxtac feasted well on that day. Those crazy gonks, Jugo brought me back from my thoughts as he pointed his thumb in the general direction of Northern Watson, where Maelstrom held control. You'd be lucky if they left you alone for a month, tops. I knew he wasn't threatening me here, but the implication behind his words still rattled me something fierce. And where is this meeting supposed to take place? I asked, deciding to just move on from that train of thought. His response came without a single beat missed. Totentans. The table under my hand cracked slightly as I ever so slowly turned to face the insane fucking gangster. Care to run that one by me again, Isamu? I don't think my audio receptors caught that. His shit-eating expression did not ease for even a moment. Totentans. I just stared for a long moment before dazedly speaking. So let me get this straight. You want to accept a meeting? I waved my hand for emphasis at one of the most known Maelstrom gathering spots. Already accepted. Jugo corrected. But yes. And then. I went on as if he didn't say a thing. You want to start a fight while in the middle of that, possibly while you are completely surrounded by angry Maelstrom. Indeed. He nodded, serenely. And you want me to be there, in their subnet. I finished, to kill your most powerful ally. Finally, his playful exterior broke as his face twitched in disgust. Did I get all that? Or is there something else absurd you want to add? I asked. You say that like you don't like my idea. He smirked. My look practically screamed. You think? He just pointed at me. Then why do you sound excited? Pausing, I immediately replayed the conversation in my mind and realized he wasn't fucking with me. Did that bullet rattle something in my brain? Distraction go. And what about Shobo? I asked. He seemed unconcerned, but it was best to make sure. That and I was grasping at straws at this point. Doesn't he need to accept the meeting too? He has no choice but to. Jugo said simply, or he proves himself the coward I have been calling him for months now. How brilliant, I thought dryly. Of course, it goes without saying that as an associate, I can't exactly force you into battle against your wishes. Jugo went on once more without missing a beat. So how does 1 mil and full access to Shobo's data sound for services rendered? Could have just lead with that, you fucking asshole, I grumbled, just as Akari Okada returned from the kitchen. Ha! Jugo snorted. Now where is the fun in that? Our talks turned to much more innocent topics once Jugo's wife returned, and we spent a good hour just talking about what we were up to whenever we were not participating in the planning or enacting of gratuitous amounts of violence. Before long, however, his lieutenants started arriving, and I quickly made my excuses to get the hell out of there. Sure, his subordinates knew not to be uppity around me, but while listening in on their planning session would be productive, I wasn't about to stand still for hours while doing so. Besides, I was already hacked into all of them and doing Overwatch for the night, so it isn't like I was going to miss something. Instead, I found myself doing my net running while going on errands on the lower floors, grabbing the materials my mum requested while also picking up my fresh order of heavily armored clothing from the Tiger's workshop and a few modifications for my ride while I was at it. On my way home, halfway through the lift ride up, I kept listening in on the meeting and immediately frowned, because Jugo, the cunt, decided to assign me a guard detail while I did my net running. And of course, he assigned the 5 who were closest to me from the gang, meaning Senko and her goons. One of these days, I was going to punch that madman's face off, army of tigers or not. 47, Chapter 47, The Reminder. Michael Magos Sobranov, the familiar feedback spike of my mechadendrite backpack reconnecting, jolted me fully awake as I hastily tossed my clothes on, the whirring of the trio of cybernetics feeling like I had just regained a lost limb, even if I had to admit to myself that I did sleep slightly lighter without them. The noise of mega building outside my window made it a fact I had definitely overslept today, which meant I was late. Probably shouldn't have kept tinkering until 4 a.m. I grumbled to myself and left for the kitchen, even if I didn't regret working on my next cyberdeck one bit. Nah, it wouldn't be ready for tomorrow, but that wasn't important. I doubted the Maelstrom had any truly competent netrunners anyway. When I rushed into the dining room/kitchen, I found 2 pairs of mildly annoyed eyes waiting for me. Sorry. I preempted their complaints by raising my hands placatingly. Time ran away from me, won't happen again, I promise. Rebecca just huffed, more annoyed that I woke her up when I left last night than anything to do with sleeping in. Glass houses and all that. Mom, on the other hand, used a secret weapon, directing me with that frustrating look of concern I just couldn't ignore no matter how hard I tried. Mikey, you know you shouldn't stay up so late. I'm 19. I huffed in a futile attempt to resist. I can stay up as late as I want. Naturally, that only made Rebecca snort. Not while you are living under my roof. Mom was having none of it, of course. Ever so briefly, I was tempted to point out it was in fact my roof we were living under, but her look promised all manner of pain and suffering if I did, and so I chose the path of life. Good. She nodded in righteous victory and ate the last of the pizza in front of me. I raised a finger to complain, but seeing the mirth in her eyes, I pretended to grumble while reaching for the fridge and quickly downing a Scott burger, packaging and all. Misty not coming? I asked. She doesn't live here, you know. Mom gave me an amused look. Yeah, I know. I waved her off, gulping down the last of the literal slop before clapping my hands and ignoring their looks of disgust. Let's get going then. Lily should have my order by now. Before long, we were walking across the busy floor 16, thankfully not having to push our way through at the most crowded junctions as the meat was smart enough to move out of the way without having to be moved. Our destination, the Second Amendment store, was unchanged. Not quite unkempt, but only just. Its sole proprietress actually paying attention to her surroundings for once as we entered. Hey, Lana. She waved at Mom, her shoulders slightly tensing. Lily. Mom waved back and paused as a series of muffled shots echoed from the nearby room. Busy day? Lily Adams shrugged. Just a bunch of kids fresh out of primary school learning to shoot. I give them a month tops before they flatline themselves. Rebecca whistled. You taking bets? No, but I probably should start. Lily laughed before looking Rebecca over curiously. Haven't seen you here before. How do mocks end up around these two? Hi. The little gremlin criped. I'm Becca. She pointed at me. This big lump's output. Lily froze, blinking a few times. Okay. She looked at me and then at Rebecca before very quietly muttering, I'm not even going to try unpacking that one. Probably for the best, I said, making her still completely like a deer caught in headlights. Is my order here yet? Yup. She nodded quickly and bolted up. They are in the back. I'll get them for you right now. And promptly ran off, outright slamming the doors behind her. Mom shook her head, smiling lightly. You threaten her or something? Rebecca asked. Poor bitch looks terrified. I shared a quick look with Mom, and we both spoke at the same time. No idea what you are talking about. Becca just rolled her eyes and shook her head. That was just about when Lily returned with a small box and placed it on the counter. Took some time looking up the exact style you wanted, but I got my hands on them in the end. She sounded downright proud as she opened the box, revealing 4 firearm grips of differing sizes and designs. Without a word, I picked one of them up between 2 fingers, tossing it into the air before snatching it within the same second, wriggling my fingers around it and quickly finding it far more comfortable than what I was used to. The shotgun grip reached just a bit beyond the bottom of my hand now, and the horizontal length was increased to accommodate for my elongated fingers, allowing me to grab it perfectly without having to pull my digits back awkwardly. And the specialized grooves were just icing on the proverbial cake. Recoil would be even less of a problem now, which meant an even tighter aim in high-intensity combat. Far too eager to just leave it for later, I unholstered my crusher and laid it out across the counter, my Terebrus mechadendrite whipping out from behind me while switching to its screwdriver option and allowing me to rapidly remove the old grip before exchanging it for the new one. Ignoring Lily's wide, terrified eyes, I picked the freshly modified weapon up and began moving it about, rapidly testing my favorite stances before nodding in satisfaction. Oh yes, I whispered to myself, absently caressing the weapon. You will do. My eyes snapped up to Lily, making her jump and yelp, and I gave her a thumbs up. Good job. She cleared her throat and took a deep breath before repeating, Thanks. We'll take 3 hours in the range, I said, ignoring her nervousness, and paid her the agreed-upon price, while also tossing her a small tip. Sure thing. She gulped and quickly gave us access. Only now did I look to the others and found both Mom and Rebecca looking at me with amusement. Ah, I paused. I did it again. Shilu Pak. The pistol slammed into his hand with each shot, the improperly held weapon very nearly twisting out of his grip, if not his excitement making him barely even notice the effort as he emptied his entire magazine into the target. Or, well, as damn near the target as he could anyway. Damn, Iggy. One of his chums slowly clapped her hands. My grandma shoots better than that. Fuck you, Hong. He flipped her off. I'm just getting used to it, that's all. Really, bro? Miguel snorted, leaning against the wall with his sunglasses still over his eyes. Could have bought a pack of cigs for all those clips you just wasted. They are mags, Igor snapped, realizing only then that he was getting baited. Man, fuck you both. Gimme that. Chu Hong yanked the Unity from his hand before he could pull it back. I'll show you how to flatline a gonk. Grumbling loudly, Igor took a step away just in case. And lucky that he did, because the moment the diminutive girl pulled the trigger, the gun went flying from her hand, falling onto the floor and going off on its own, hitting the exact spot Igor was standing in moments ago. Fuck, Hong cursed, clutching at her suddenly very red wrist. Pinche puta madre, Miguel agreed, running over to the two of them and immediately looking Igor over. You intact, chum? Still shaking from the experience, Igor slowly looked down and damn near pissed himself in relief when he realized he wasn't bleeding anywhere. Yeah, he nodded shakily. I'm good. Whew! Miguel exhaled in relief. Imagine getting flatlined like that. He snapped his fingers, just fucking about, and suddenly, poof. Igor's entire upper body twitched. Don't even say that. Right, sorry. Miguel raised his hands, still smirking. Think that is enough for today, Hong? The girl, still clutching at her wrist and glaring hatefully at the smoking pistol, nodded. And just as they were all starting to relax again, a downright cacophonous salvo of shotgun fire from nearby made them all scream out in a panic, even if the noise was simply drowned out by the gunfire. It took them only a few moments longer to realize they should probably get down as well. But for whatever reason, the salvo just didn't seem to stop, no matter how long they waited. Igor was the first to recover, and once his mind stopped going all fight or flight on him, he quickly realized someone else probably entered the range while they were distracted with their new toys, and he cautiously stood up to see what was happening. What he found made him equally terrified and excited. On the other end of the shooting range, he saw the local fucking legend unloading a pre-mass crusher like it owed him money, while two others watched. Whenever his magazine clicked empty, something flashed on his left that made him reload so quickly it seemed like he didn't reload at all, simply continuing to fire while grinning a terrifying, toothy grin. And hoo boy, that was a lot of fucking teeth right there. Preem as fuck, Igor muttered. Holy fuck, Miguel whispered next to him, almost making him jump. Hong looked far less impressed, though. Ah, what do you mean, ah? Miguel shook her shoulder. Don't you know who that is? Duh. She looked at him like he was an idiot. We are neighbors. The salvo of shotgun fire stopped suddenly. That is correct, Ms. Chu. The echoing synthetic voice could belong to only one person, and it just so happens that your grandmother kindly asked me to keep an eye on you. Hong gulped. Igor wasn't sure what to think right now, and Miguel was too busy whispering, holy shit, holy shit, holy shit, to add anything smart. If I wasn't clear enough. The cyborg went on, sounding a bit annoyed this time. That means get over here now. The trio stood up with baffling synchronicity and in their awe proceeded to almost mechanically walk over to the cyborg's side of the range. While they did so, the shorter woman with Magos was doing her best to hold down a laugh, while the taller grey-haired one that looked half as borged out as the Borg himself was looking over the kids with mild concern. Right then, Magos said as the three gonks reached him, finally turning to look at them as the pupils in his left eye whirred and changed sizes. No actual wounds, but you did strain your arms quite a bit, which is going to suck in the morning. You have more luck than you have brains. Miguel began muttering again, and Igor found he agreed with him. He was actually paying attention to them. Hong, on the other hand, had more pressing concerns. Please don't tell my granny about this. Why wouldn't I? The cyborg titled his head. That poor woman does nothing but worry about you, and I'm supposed to lie to her. We'll get better, I swear. The girl waved her hands frantically. Just don't tell her, please. I can't listen to any more nagging. Oi, Miguel suddenly snapped at her. Don't talk shit about your abuela. That woman is a saint. Hong stuck her tongue out at him. Feeling emboldened by the relative easing of the atmosphere, Igor looked up to the cyborg and decided to shoot his shot. Why not show us how to do it then, so we don't fuck it up again? The range turned silent again, save for the quiet snort of the short woman, and the only answer Igor got for his bold proposal was a slow, deliberate blink. Suddenly feeling very awkward, the boy began shuffling on his feet. But before Magos could tell him to fuck right off, the heavily cyberized grey-haired woman spoke up. I guess I can show you kids how not to kill yourselves. She turned to her chooms. Have fun, you two. Magos gave a brief look before shrugging. Sure, have fun. Oh, I will. The grey-haired woman smirked. Don't worry, kids. When I am done with you, you won't misfire ever, again. For some reason, that smirk suddenly looked incredibly ominous. Michael Magos Sobranov, strolling through floor 10 for my meeting with Senko and her fellow goons while decked out in my freshly modified weapons, I couldn't help but add a bit of swagger to my step, which also helped with the crowd that was even worse than the one on my own floor. In fact, whenever I left my home base, I had to pay special attention to all of my things, as despite the fact I was a literal walking death machine, some gonks were just living life on hard mode and trying to speedrun the Darwin Award by trying to swipe me. And I couldn't just break them in half, because the NCPD was real nosy whenever a mess happened inside a mega building. I supposed some light viruses would have to suffice. Winner number 3 winced and clutched at his head as Pon-Pon shit started blasting directly into his brain on max volume, his groans quickly turning into panicked screams. A cruel fate, but a deserved one. Finally free of the massive crowd as I left the main hallway, I found myself briefly distracted by a shop display showing off a selection of machine guns, only to then hear a slightly slurred from my right, "Hey there, Sugar, looking for some fun?" My head twitched in the voice's direction, only for my tension to disappear instantly as I saw what was obviously a thoroughly washed-up Joy Toy trying to ply her trade, dressed in what could generously be called skimpy clothing, and with her eyes unfocused to the point she was obviously under the influence of something. Or multiple somethings, if I was being honest. Before she could open her mouth again, I cut her off. Not interested. She scowled, and that would have been that if not for a sudden jolt in my memory. See, when I decided to suck my complaints up and just do my job for Jugo over a month ago, I made sure to download all the information I could about the Joy Toy deal I was foolish enough to end up watching over. And having looked it over, I knew the faces of every single toy involved. And this just happened to be one of them. My entire body stilled as I looked the battered and bruised woman over. "Change your mind, Sugar?" she asked. "No." I shook my head and shot her a tip anyway. "Have a good day." She blinked before shrugging and lighting up a cigarette, probably already having forgotten I was even there. Not even 10 seconds after I left her behind, I flicked my agent on and selected a contact. Regina Jones, Magos. The fixer greeted with a nod only 3 seconds later. "You've been quiet." Magos. "Apologies, Ms. Jones, but I have no time for idle chatter," I said coldly. "I am in need of your services." An interested gleam appeared in her sole eye. "I'm listening." Scanning through my files again, I made the decision I need someone removed. 48. Chapter 48, Maelstrom Meetup. The flimsy elevator gates clapped shut behind me as I stepped out into the mega building's garage space, the sudden cut in the relative silence startling the shit out of a trio of visibly drugged-up teenagers as they fled from the factory-fresh car they were trying to jack while falling over themselves. Shaking my head at the sheer idiocy of leaving a new quadra in the public parking space, I continued on to the private area, the 2 tiger claws set up to guard it, tensing briefly at my soundless approach, but quickly relaxing as I waved them down. The 2 of them were used to me by now and quickly returned to their game of poker. Probably should get them another pizza one of these days, I decided as I reached my destination, and waiting there, just in front of my personal garage, stood the 5 goons. 4 of whom were sitting around or leaning against the wall, trying to look relaxed and hiding their obvious nerves, while the 5th was openly pacing about, fingers tapping her crossed arm as she did. "There you are," my liaison not quite hissed as she noticed me. "We were starting to worry you wouldn't show." Instead of answering, I merely offered her a slow, deliberate blink before looking her fellow goons over, a good number of whom did fall over each other as they scrambled to get up. "Fine," Senko sighed through her bandana. I was starting to get worried. Got held up. A worried mother asking me if I had all of my ammunition ready and packed did not strictly fall into the stereotype, but I'd take it. And I said to meet up early for this exact reason. "Right," she nodded jerkily and looked away. "Got the jitters?" I asked quietly. "Yeah." She exhaled, voice just as low, her micro shivers calming slightly. "It's been a while since I got into a fight." "Well, at least you are as ready as you are going to get." I raised my voice a bit, trying to sound encouraging as I briefly looked at the new helmets, ARs, shotguns and vests I myself bankrolled for the 5 of them, even if I knew deep down that the dollar store gear would do fuck all against a properly borged-out Strommer. And Senko seemed to agree as she winced under her bandana. "Yeah, at least we aren't going straight into Totentans." "True," I said. "If Jugo tried that, I might have actually punched him." 2 of the tigers tensed, faces scrunching up in anger, but a stare from their boss had them keeping their mouths shut. Well, mostly silent. One of them kicked the ground with a disgusted che, but that was downright saintly self-control for a tiger claw teen. "None of you tried getting in?" I asked as I turned to the garage. "No." She shook her head and followed me, and her voice told me half of her nerves came from making sure none of her people did. "Good," I said, deactivating the explosives. The moment we stepped in and the lights came on, my audio receptors caught a couple of startled gasps at the sight. My ride had gone through a bit of an evolution recently. Scratch that. I went completely and utterly overboard and ended up overhauling the damn thing so much I might as well have constructed the whole vehicle from scratch by the end of it. It still held the vague shape of a Mahir Supron, but the black van was now almost a quarter size bigger. Its wheels and tires made to be just as bullet and likely low-caliber shell-proof as the rest of the monstrosity, while frontal windshield was now fully covered with metal, save for a small slit on the driver's side. It probably didn't even count as the same vehicle anymore. But once I started, I just couldn't stop, and here we were. My eyes flickered to the boxy protrusion in front of what would be the co-driver's seat, and I allowed myself a slight grin at the memory of that addition before focusing back on the ride. "Nani the fuck," Senko muttered lowly enough that only I could hear it, making me hold back a snort. "Oi, Gunso." One of the other tigers spoke up with a whistle, eyes straight up sparkling at the sight. "You didn't tell us we were riding in style tonight." "Apparently," Senko muttered while giving me a quick baffled look before clapping her hands and putting her game face back on. "All right, enough gawking. What is the plan, Margot-san?" "While we could theoretically do the whole gig from within the van," I began, and some of the more eager claws already seemed disappointed. "I'm going to want to get as close to their mainframe as I possibly can to really make sure they can't fuck with us. So we are going to be infiltrating an apartment across the street where I can jack into the local net directly." Getting into the building Totentans was located in would have been optimal, but it would have completely defeated the point of trying to hide, as they definitely had lookouts posted all over the place. Also, I was getting paid for my net running, not to go on another rampage. Naturally, the eager tigers immediately perked back up. "All I am expecting from you five," I went on, pointing my hand vaguely in their direction and trying to sound authoritative, "is to keep your eyes peeled, call out any suspicious shit, and give me supporting fire if things go the way of Pacifica." "Come on, Borg-san." The only other female present tisked, "Aren't you looking down on us a bit much here?" "Can you take a shotgun to the face and live?" was my immediate retort. "Well?" She stopped raising her hand and looked away. "No. Then you stay behind me and shoot any gonk that isn't armored up to the gills while I deal with the rest," I said sternly, and felt a message spring up from Jugo's end. "All right, we've got to get moving now. No outside contact from this point on. I catch you calling someone, I am taking it as you outing us and frying your ass clear." 3 of the 4 goons tensed and began shuffling on their feet. I repeated slowly, opening my mouth for emphasis. "Is that clear?" Senko cleared her throat. "Clear," the 3 immediately shouted. I gave them a long stare and scanned their faces for signs of deceit, but only found a growing unease as I stayed like that for a good few seconds, before nodding, "Good, get in, I'm driving." Isamu Jugo Okada. He shared a look with his bodyguards as the limo stopped in front of the mega building, some of whom didn't bother hiding their disdain as a well-dressed man stepped out of the co-driver's seat, opening the passenger's doors like some kind of high corpo valet before bowing politely to the one inside. Isamu's fellow captain looked just as tidy on the surface as ever, the man wearing a full white old-school 3-piece suit, adjusting his cravat as he leisurely made his way to Jugo, smiling politely all the way. "Okada Dono." Jotaro Shobo offered a slight bow as if greeting an equal. "A lovely evening for productive discussion, no?" "Fucking slime," Jugo growled internally. "Shobo," is what he said, "took your time getting here. We can't shame the Brotherhood by not appearing at our best." Shobo responded without missing a beat, tugging at the hem of his vest before making a show of scowling, even if it is to negotiate with Maelstrom filth. "Know all about that, don't you?" Isamu felt a vein on his forehead throb, but took a delightfully clear breath to calm himself. "I don't care about you getting distracted by your pet boy toys, Shobo. We have a display to make. Where are your soldiers?" The implied insult passed through the man like so much air as he raised his hands reassuringly. "Peace, brother. Peace. They will be riding a short distance behind us. I simply did not want to crowd the area and draw needless NCPD attention." Jugo's eyes narrowed, but a quick mental ping confirmed that he wasn't getting fucked over, and there was in fact a bunch of cars waiting just out of sight. Good. He decided, even if the fuckers are good only for taking a few bullets, I'll take it. His men, real tiger claws, were gathered all around them, weapons at the ready and a thirst for battle in their eyes, prepared to fight and die for him and each other at every given moment. A shame Shobo remained just as outwardly unflappable as ever, despite being surrounded by dozens of them. Seeing him squirm would have made Jugo's night that much better. Still, I have to admit, the tiger claw in question spoke up. I did not expect one of your honorable stature to accept negotiations from Maelstrom. It was quite surprising to hear, inspiring really. His tone made his irritation with being forced to join quite clear. We have a business to run, Jugo scoffed, fingers threatening to ball into a fist. And as much as I like smashing the cyber psychos, stripping them for parts is scav work. Shobo made a vaguely agreeing hum. While I do appreciate preparing a nice mise en place, I will agree that the ingredients Maelstrom offers are rarely of good quality. Jugo gave him a look that practically screamed, "What in the fuck are you talking about?" But Shobo just kept smirking at him in his frustrating, punchable way. Thankfully, he was not given too much time to ponder the option. In position, the call still ongoing in his agent sounded out, followed by the telltale sound of a thermal katana being swung and a head falling from its shoulders, freely tumbling down the floor, jacking in. Jugo held back a grin and addressed his brother. "About time we met our adversaries, no?" Shobo's smile was downright oily. "Indeed, Okada Dono. Michael Magos Sobronov." As the Tiger Claw delegation approached the Maelstrom nightclub, and my bodyguard detail was busy shoving the trio of scav corpses, whose home I just happened to decide on as my forward base, I allowed myself a moment to observe Totentanz. The nightclub was located in the middle floors of what used to be an industrial office building, and was usually quite famous for being the perfect place for anyone to get high and go on a murder riot, so long as they didn't start shit with the gang, of course. Despite its popularity, though, Totentanz was a complete and utter mess of a place. The trash from previous nights was only removed on a surface level, and I could detect actual body and cyberware parts in places that were only slightly difficult to reach, stacked atop each other over the course of months. Tonight, only Maelstrommers could be found within, still partying, because most of them probably didn't even understand the concept of discipline, while their favorite pet band Tinnitus was blasting out the incomprehensible cacophony they called music at full volume. Still don't understand what is so special about those guys. Wait. I paused, rising my audio receptor sensitivity, only to blink as I realized the music was actually layered, and surprisingly soothing to my cybernetic senses. Shaking my head at the revelation, I left exploring the genre for later and moved my observation to the night's host. Jason Powerpump Rogers was a mountain of mismatched chrome, heavy-duty industrial-grade cyberlegs attached to a torso that was more welded armor plating than practical musculature. All of that made to support the weight of the actual hand cannon that replaced his left arm, leaving his right disproportionately small in comparison. And of course, his face was almost completely missing, save for the back of his head, the signature 8-optic visor of Maelstrom shining a baleful red that I found preem despite the lacking design. Sprawled across a downright filthy couch, the 8 feet of at most 15% meat was actively twitching due to the differing OS signals streaming through his brain as his far more reasonably chromed but equally inhuman-looking henchman kept trying to make him listen about actual negotiation tactics. Were the Strommers actually trying to make peace? Or was this one just particularly business-minded? Did it matter? I thought with dark humor as I unloaded my demons into their network, slipping past their dwellers who were currently too busy to notice as they were all sharing an XBD. Jugo and Shobo entering the club with their guards drew my attention back away from the freak show upstairs. The less cyberized tiger claws all reacted negatively to the sudden wave of sharp red lighting and overloud music, but their bosses still kept their composure and marched up to the Maelstrommer's own leader with confidence. Or at least they were about to, before the massive specimen of chrome stood up with a downright painful groan of cyberware, throwing his cannon arm up in something between a salute and a threat. "Hugo!" The cyborg damn near shook the room. "Finally got your arse here, you coward." "Hello, Jason," Jugo said as Shobo failed to react to not being addressed. "Still haven't lost your mind under all that chrome?" "Not before you lose your head." The near cyber psycho slurred blaringly and flipped him off with his normal hand. The trio of bosses got into a short stare-down before the big hunk of metal grunted and waved for them to come up to his booth. The mass of maelstrom cyborgs making a path, but leaving it narrow enough to be intimidating, as many of them kept twitching threateningly at the Tiger Claw bodyguards and threw insults that were lost in the blare of music. Still, something had been bothering me ever since the target arrived to the mega building, and for once I decided to be appropriately paranoid while on the job. The man, someone whom I knew for a fact was not willing to participate in this, looked far too at ease with everything. He still deferred to Jugo as the leaders began throwing further greetings disguised as insults at each other and twitched in fear when appropriate. But his eyes were focused, and so were those of his guards. Naturally, I decided those suspicions were enough to fry him in advance and began my attack on his systems, only to briefly pause at what I found. Since when did fresh Tiger captains have Corpo-grade ICE? Just then, as I prepared to rip him apart despite this, I felt a signal behind me in my hideout and immediately jerked back to reality, my head twisting sideways to reveal one of the Tiger Claw goons stationed with me trembling in terror. All I had the time to do, as I flashed a ping.exe through the building, was reach for my barrier as a screaming cyborg blurred through the doors in an explosion of shards and dust. Isamu Jugo Okada. We want access all the way to Kennedy North. Power Pump slurred, his normal hand trembling as he messily downed an unbranded beer, covering his cybernetic face in the liquid without a care. You want us to leave a mega building? Jugo laughed openly as he downed a cup of his own sake. Do you take us for cowards, Jason, or idiots for that matter? He wasn't going to drink the maelstrom swill. Don't care about your fucking building, you scopsucker, and I's Power Pump. The massive cyborg growled, smashing the bottle on the ground. We want access to that. He paused, head swaying a bit. Doesn't matter. He waved down, deal or no deal. That's not how negotiations work, Jason. Jugo's lips twitched almost eagerly as he used his given out of spite. If you actually want to make a deal, make me a reasonable offer. His hand fell on his sheathed katana. Or did you call me here just so we could have our rematch with an audience? Ha! Power Pump barked/growled. His glitchy synthetic voice made it hard to identify which one exactly, and leaned in, his optics flaring threateningly as he laid his hand cannon on the drinking table, smashing the many bottles on it in the process. You think you can set terms here? Undeterred, Jugo leaned forward himself, his eyes promising violence. Yes, I can. The cyborg glared as his goons tensed and reached for their weapons, but only briefly, as a moment later he made a garbled synthetic noise that came suspiciously close to a snort before leaning back and waving for him to go on. Isamu smirked and decided to put his colleague on the spot for a while to give himself some time to plot. Got anything to add? Watch out for traitors. Shobo? When he turned, he found his brother pointing anew at his head, the maelstrom around him showing not even an ounce of surprise in their posture. My deepest apologies, Okada Dono, Shobo smirked. But Watson is simply too small for the both of us. 49, Chapter 49, Negotiations Breakdown. Michael Margot Sobronov, click, boom. The charging maelstromer is thrown bodily back as my Buria discharges into his center mass. His cyberized weight clotheslines his buddies, who are rushing in after him, knocking them around and briefly blocking the entrance as my artifacts whipped out from behind my coat, reloading my railgun for me, while my free hand clutched the new grip of my crusher. Covering fire, I ordered coolly, ignoring the terror-stunned traitor in favor of stepping in front of the actually salvageable Tiger Claws, currently too busy scrambling for their weapons to react. Just in time for the maelstromers to recover and rush into the room with shotguns of their own. All they got for their trouble was a wall of noise and lead, mismatched chrome shredding under the weight of my fire, while my own barely even registered their own pitiful attempts to do the same. Another signal pinged back to my cyberdeck, and my hand twitched to the right just in time for the window to burst apart as a lithe maelstromer crashed her way through, her body jerking back immediately after as a tungsten shell caved her chest in, throwing her back into the face of the Gangoon, climbing after her and sending him hurtling through the air before his screams were shut dead by the pavement below. A hail of gunfire came from the tigers behind me, suppressing the main assault just as I aimed my shotgun hand to the left, the wall of the neighboring apartment exploding under the charge of a massive cyborg. The roaring wall of man and chrome stopped in his tracks and then staggered, his roars turning pained and even louder as I unloaded the remainder of my Crusher magazine directly into him, his heavy armor cracking but not breaking under the hail. Seeing him raising his hand that quickly began disassembling into a projectile launch system, I reacted on instinct more than I did with any real strategy, dropping my buria and launching myself forward with all the force I could muster in that split second. His hand was fully disassembled now, but his weapon failed to fire as a weapon glitch.x pierced his ice, and I slammed my thermal katana down into the offending shoulder, slightly misaligning the cut in the rush. The massive Strommer growled under the pain, and I saw his entire body tensing as he prepared to try and crush me with his bare hands. In a flash, my Secutor bit into his fleshy throat, and I ripped the sword out with a growl of my own, the backswing violently sawing his head off in one visceral pull of blade and mechadendrite. Briefly, as I turned to the main entrance, both the Tigers and Maelstrom paused what they were doing as the cyborg's body toppled over, before Senko and her goons caught themselves and redoubled their fire, and I threw myself the remaining chrome cultists. They did not last a minute. The final Maelstromer coughed as he was slammed against the wall of the hallway, looking up at me with dazed optics. Holy shit. He choked out blood, but the glow in his eyes only grew. What a beaut. A shotgun shell blew his head off, and I sent out one final ping, finding I was not quite right about him being the last. My artifacts tossed me my reloaded buria as I looked down, seeing the outline of two less modified Strommers trying to make a run for it down the stairs. I patiently lined up the shot and waited for the perfect moment before pulling the trigger, easily nailing the both of them through 2 floors worth of concrete. Half a blink later, the two red silhouettes fell over each other like puppets with their strings cut, and every Strommer in the building was dead. Clear, I called as I returned back to the hideout, the 2 goons aiming at me, slowly lowering their weapons as I fully entered through the hole in the wall. Senko was currently busy crouched down, looking over a bullet-riddled body, with her hands moving about erratically, uselessly, over the corpse that was once her friend. Her eyes snapped up to mine, and despite knowing better, I still ran a quick vital scan. Shaking my head and making her shoulders slump in defeat, I moved on to the final Tiger Claw in the room, who didn't even have the common decency to try and escape what he tried doing. Instead, the traitor was currently curled up in the corner of the room, his side bleeding from a stray shot, and the rest of him shaking in terror as I walked over. How did they find us? Senko's hateful voice stopped me before I could get rid of the filth. I kept my cold glare on the terrified man and gave the answer. They obviously couldn't have hacked us, and our location was undecided up to until an hour ago. Maelstrom didn't have any patrols in the building, which just leaves someone informing them of our position in real time. All 3 surviving loyal Tigers immediately snapped their eyes to me and then to who I was looking at. The man pulled his knees back and began to openly sob. I'm sorry. He looked up at me with bloodshot eyes. They had my family. Pausing briefly, I nodded. I understand. And faster than he could react, I reached over and twisted his head by 180 degrees. The Claw trio behind me all flinched at the sound, but I ignored their utter terror as I stood up. Keep watch. We'll have to get out quickly and soon. Senko inhaled sharply and stood up, offering me a nod and turning to her people. Now then, how in the fuck do I salvage this clusterfuck? I thought, feeling oddly somber as I jacked back into the local net, quite certain that my current employer was very dead with how I left him. Isamu Jugo Okada, earlier. As the blinged-out pistol rested against his forehead, Isamu couldn't help but burst into mocking laughter. Jotaro, Jotaro, Jotaro. He shook his head, staring up at the other Tiger's sneer. Even when you finally find your balls, you still have to disappoint me. Shobo's eyes widened, and he immediately went to pull the trigger. At the same time, Jugo felt an electric jolt flash through his entire system, and in a blink, the scene changed from him kneeling before a gun to Sobo's arm flying away alongside his weapon. Ugh! Shobo choked at the sudden loss of sensation, and his dilating eyes slowly lowered to its source, his entire body beginning to shake before a scream of pain ripped its way out of his throat. Jugo's grin threatened to split his face as he felt the spike of heat lance through his back, but before he could decapitate his traitorous shit of a former comrade, he felt his instincts screaming at him and was forced to leap back as something approaching an artillery shell detonated where he was just standing. Finally, Power Pump roared, completely unbothered by the fact his ambush was evaded as he glared down at a panting Jugo and addressed his gang, "Kill 'em all." The entirety of Totentanz shook under the sheer cacophony that followed the boss's declaration as each and every tiger claw that wasn't Shobo was immediately swarmed by the screaming and roaring horde of drugged-up maelstromers. Shobo's bodyguards were ripped apart in seconds, but Jugo's men were old hands at this business and immediately fell into place around their boss, who had quickly leapt from Power Pump's booth. They didn't waste time even looking at each other, simply reaching for their weapons and sinking into the crowd with their swords and mantis claws out, ripping their way through the sea of bodies the way they knew best. One cut at a time. Jugo wasn't sure how it started, but by the time Power Pump's cannon blasted a clump of his own men into pieces as he tried to blow him up, he was laughing like a complete madman, his sword arm swinging without stopping and painting Totentanz even redder than it was before with the blood of the maelstrom. His joyous laughter only increased as the band on stage began playing even harder, and he sunk deeper and deeper into the haze of battle, at one point going blind with the sheer amount of blood that got stuck in his eyes. Only when he heard the distant echo of gunfire did he shake himself awake, somehow managing to wipe his face with his bloody sleeve and finding himself surrounded at the center of the nightclub with only two of his men with him, one of whom was missing an entire arm and the other half of his face. "Fucking Ugo." Power Pump let out a rumbling noise that was somewhat reminiscent of a glitchy if satisfied chuckle, his raised cannon slowly lowering to point at the trio of claws. "Finally gotcha." "Boss," his right-hand Borg suddenly called out. Power Pump's whole body twitched as he slowly rounded on the man and roared in his face. "What?" Brick flinched and quickly answered. "Tigers are attacking the building in numbers. They'll be up here in less than a minute." "Then what the fuck are you doing interrupting me?" The giant Borg backhanded Brick with his cannon hand, sending him sprawling into the mass of bodies and turning to face Jugo again. But he was interrupted again, as Shobo, clutching his stump as he went, shoulder-checked his way through the crowd, nearly getting himself stabbed for his trouble, if not for Power Pump glaring down the offending Strommer. "Wait a moment, Power Pump." The Borg growled, his optics glowing threateningly, but surprisingly to Jugo, nodded. "Okada." Shobo faced Jugo. "Traitor," Isamu spat. "Call it what you want, you hypocrite." Shobo sneered hatefully. "It doesn't matter, because today is the day I finally get rid of you." "Oh?" Jugo tilted his head, resting his katana on his shoulder like he wasn't surrounded by hundreds of crazed cyborgs. "And what makes you think you are capable?" "Your stubborn refusal to die complicates things," Sobo went on with grit teeth, "but knowing you I prepared for it anyway." He twitched his head towards Power Pump. "My soldiers are positioned all around your men attacking this place. You will accept your death and order them to follow my word, or—" Shobo paused as his eyes narrowed into a glare. "I will have them killed to the last." "You want to hand Watson over to the maelstrom over a grudge?" Isamu demanded, momentarily baffled with the scale of idiocy he had just witnessed. "Power Pump and I have a deal." Shobo shrugged. "Now you can throw hundreds of your subordinates to die, or you can accept your own death and tell them to pull back." Shobo repeated, "I'm sure the honorable dog you like to pretend at being will love the poetry of it, and it is definitely preferable to what I am going to do to you if you don't." The cold cruelty in Shobo's eyes made it quite obvious he preferred the latter. Seeing Jugo's eyes turn cold in turn, he quickly added the final nail in the coffin, "And there is no need to wait for your pet netrunner. He has been dealt with." At this, Jugo found himself pausing, a small frown forming on his face, before he threw his head back and laughed far harder than he did even as he cut his way through dozens of cyborgs. "What is so funny?" Shobo growled, his frustration bubbling from under his control. "Do you not understand the gravity of this situation, you goddamn fool?" "Ha!" Jugo let out a final bark of laughter before looking back down to the traitor. "You are the one who doesn't understand shit, Shobo." He grinned, pointing his katana at him. "Tigers die on their feet." Shobo's eyes widened, and his face somehow twisted into an even more hateful expression. "Oh, I will enjoy skinning you alive." Back in action. Before being replaced by one of utter terror, "No." He muttered, "No, no, no, no." He began clawing at the back of his head with his sole hand so hard he drew blood. But it was all for nothing, as every single implant in his body began to overload. He was given a brief moment to contemplate just how utterly dead he was as his body began steaming on multiple spots, before the delicate balance of his systems snapped and his entire body was set on fire. Even as the screaming human torch that was Jotaro Shobo rolled on the ground in a futile attempt to survive, Powerpump found himself stepping over the soon-to-be corpse without a care, only to pause and spit on it, "Good ucking riddance," before turning to face Jugo, who was currently grinning like a loon, and just as an explosion rang out behind him, signaling the arrival of his troops, he sent a message to his lieutenant, commanding him to take over Shobo's men and herd them forward, and activated the experimental Sandavistan attached to his back. He felt entire world slow to a crawl, and he felt every single synapse in his body fire as he forced it to move faster than it had any right to, ducking under Powerpump's line of fire and launching himself forward through the crowd of maelstromers once again. The second was stretched into what felt like an hour as he slashed throat after throat, taking ahead with each step even as heat built up on his back. And just as he felt his implant about to run out, he launched himself off the falling chest of a cyborg and into the air, his blade raised as he appeared mid-air above the maelstrom boss. Jugo let out a battle cry as he swung down with all his might, looking to decapitate his old enemy and finish this in one swing. Fucking! Powerpump's roar blurred just as his body did, his previously vulnerable flank disappearing in favor of a rising hand cannon. "You go." He finished his curse and pulled the mental trigger. But instead of firing, his weapon clicked, jammed. Jugo didn't waste any time in pressing the opportunity, slashing again and again at his disoriented foe, only to be smashed back when he once more got tantalizingly close to finally ending it. The gang battle around them turned bloodier by the second as well, the close-quarters melee quickly evolving into by explosions and hails of gunfire as more and more tiger claws rushed in over the corpses of their fellow gang members. All the while, Tinnitus refused to leave the stage, their lead singer screaming ever louder for his adoring audience. Jugo and Powerpump blurred over and over again, constantly pushing against each other but failing to land a killing blow until the cyborg clamped down on the irritating program, invading him with all the processing power his ice held, giving himself a moment to act. He and Jugo shared a look, and as one activated their Sandavistans, the ground behind the swordsman exploded, shredding his legs and back with shrapnel before he disappeared in a blur of speed, only to appear behind his enemy, his sword held forward with both hands. Behind him, the massive cyborg stared ahead at the enemy gang members pouring into his totentans, and his normal hand slowly reached for his neck. He let out a gurgle, and his head slipped off his shoulders. Seeing it tumbling next to him, Jugo grinned and finally lost consciousness. Michael Magos Sobranov. With eyes that were completely and utterly dead, I disconnected from the local net, having just gone through enough emotional whiplash to last me a lifetime. When I discovered Jugo was still alive, I was surprisingly relieved and immediately focused on the near-impossible job of making him survive after this clusterfuck of a situation. In fact, I felt so motivated all of a sudden that I decided to ignore the uncomfortable feeling Powerpump's systems gave me and hacked him despite my paranoia. Thankfully, he only had the touch of old AI in him, and not an actual subroutine, so I survived the attempt, even if I was going to have to scour my systems just in case. And what does Jugo do with all this? The madman holds back so he can act out a fucking Bushido scene, that's what. Checking the feed just in time to see one of his goons dragging him off, I muttered, "Give me back my worry, you bastard," and decided my work here was done. The damn weeb could clean up after himself. 50. Chapter 50. Getting Out of Dodge. The Gangoon. She felt completely numb as the four of them that were still alive rushed out the apartment building, so much so that she barely even registered the increasingly creative and vitriolic spew of curses directed at her captain coming from the Fulborg's maw. Admittedly, the open battle going on all around them made ignoring the grumbling quite a bit easier, but the synthetic growl still managed to cut through the noise despite it. In her state, she failed to notice the Borg suddenly stopping and raising his shotgun before simply deleting a nearby balcony, including the squad of Strommers trying to set themselves up on top of it. He didn't acknowledge her except for a small twitch of his head. She felt a jolt of panic despite herself, but the cyborg seemed to be distracted by something again as he looked off into the distance, staring into something only he could see. "Fuck it," Margos cursed suddenly. "Change of plans, we are grabbing the idiot and then getting the fuck out of here." Mari and Chen bristled, but the still fresh sight of what happened to June kept them quiet. Senko, on the other hand, found she just couldn't give a shit anymore. Seeing Kay drop dead full of holes already shook her, but then seeing Margos rip June's head off like flicking open a fucking beer bottle without even bothering to ask for her opinion. Suffice to say, she simply didn't care anymore. "Sure you want to take another risk for an idiot?" She snapped up at the cyborg. Her two still living soldiers took a cautious step away from her, while Margos simply stared down at her before offering a singular, slow, deliberate blink, leaving her feeling like a complete fucking gonk. But as he turned back to his vehicle, he did answer, "Got to make sure my money printer is alive." He shook his head as his eyes flashed with the telltale glow of a call. Someone else might get it wrong. "Right," she scoffed in her mind. Not giving her any time to actually respond, he pointed Mari and Chen to the back while waving for Senko to follow him. "We are going in hot," he said clippedly as she took the co-driver's seat. "You are manning the cannon." Senko's hand, currently clutching Kay's bloody necklace, halted as she ever so slowly turned to look at him. "The fucking what now?" The Borg ignored her at first, starting the engine and getting them moving before pointing at the glowing panel in front of her she failed to notice earlier, just as the inside of the armored windshield lit up with a live display of what was going on outside. The streets surrounding the building that held Totentans were pure chaos, with Maelstrom reinforcements rushing in only to be intercepted by more and more arriving Tigers. Both gangs appeared to have gone completely berserk in how they simply kept throwing bodies against each other with reckless abandon, uncaring for losses or the expense as entire groups disappeared each moment under sudden hails of gunfire or explosive detonations. And the van Senko was inside of was currently hurtling straight at a group of borged-out Strommers that were setting up a barricade facing the main entrance and hosing any Tiger in their sights in deadly machine gun fire. She was so taken by the sheer number of people butchering each other that she almost missed the controller-like device springing out of the dashboard in front of her, just as the blocky protrusion on the outside of her seat sprang out to reveal a fucking autocannon. Without her own prompting, her hands reached out for the controller as her eyes scanned the target display, marking out every single Strommer in sight in a red outline. She didn't even notice it as she began breathing heavily and spared a quick questioning look to the cyborg next to her. Margos merely winked and grinned. "Go wild." Apology accepted. She grinned back and clutched the firing button like her life depended on it. The 40mm monstrosity belching out tracer rounds across the entire street and butchering everything in aiming distance. "Oh fuck the hell yes," she found herself whispering and pressed down again. For that brief moment, as she ripped and incinerated everything in reach, she felt like she was on top of the world, like all the terror she was feeling was completely and utterly irrelevant, which only made the moment the van suddenly stopped and the shell belt clicked empty that much worse, the dazed Tiger Claw barely saved from smashing her face into the windshield like a gonk by the belt she didn't remember tying herself with. A childish part of her felt like pouting, but she was given no time to consider the injustices of the world as she was hit by a sudden wall of noise, head snapping to the source only to see that Margos had opened his doors and half-stepped out with his shotgun in hand and was currently butchering any Maelstrom psychotic enough to remain nearby after what she did to them. Some fucking how he managed to cause nearly as much destruction with a crusher as she did with an autocannon. The reason they stopped revealed itself mere seconds later as a pair of heavily wounded higher-rank tigers burst out of the building, dragging a very familiar body between them. The one-armed half of the bodyguard detail head-butted a strummer off the staircase as his comrade tossed a grenade behind them. The rest of the gangoons between them and safety rapidly cut down by the steady bark of an assault shotgun. Waking up from her cannon-induced daze, she reached for her own gun and readied herself to join the fight, only to feel her seat twist and find herself suddenly staring into the interior of the van, her subordinates once more directing her with weirded-out looks. This time she did pout. Michael Mago Sobranov. The instant the two bodyguards dragged Jugo's bleeding and broken body inside, I mentally slammed the doors shut and floored the gas, launching my Mahir like a springboard and through a freshly arrived Maelstrom biker. That is going to be a bitch to clean. I grumbled as I twisted the steering wheel, side-checking another strummer off his bike and drifting into a narrow street nearby and speeding down it just as the distant roar of AV engines began filling the air. Hopefully Jugo's lieutenant could disengage most of his men before the impending Maxtac slaughter began in earnest. Now usually Night Corp wasn't supposed to get involved in gang warfare, but this shitfest was too loud for them not to pretend not to pay attention. A bunch of gangers killing each other en masse was one thing, 2 apartment buildings collapsing before the fight started in earnest? Well, they needed to maintain their authority over the city somehow. When he recovers, I am hitting Jugo in the dick. Bold plan, my chrome fucking ass. Meticulously memorizing plans of future violence, I split my attention as the city blurred around me, commanding my mechadendrites to whip out behind me and into the van's interior as I got to work. Flip him over, I ordered, and the gonks who thought it was a good idea to lay their boss on his bleeding back rushed to listen to me. As I patched Jugo's fucked up behind up, my artifacts picked up a pair of healing aids and offered the first to the one-armed bodyguard, while just straight up spraying the other directly in the face. Most of his nerves had been scraped off anyways. He didn't feel a thing. You. The artifacts pointed at the one with the fucked arm, making him flinch minutely. Deactivate the cyber arm. The signal is starting to scramble, and you won't like what happens if you don't. Hi. The man dutifully grunted and did as I asked. Good, I said as I drifted through another street. Anyone know how to stitch a wound? Senko slowly raised her hand. Congratulations. I smirked to myself. You are helping me sew your boss's ass together. Every single tiger claw blanched as we got to work. Some 5 minutes later, as I was halfway through extracting every shard of shrapnel from Jugo, I had to focus harder so he wasn't left with bits still in him and ended up missing a tiny ping on my internal map, which inevitably meant I ended up driving up to a small NCPD barricade. My eyes narrowed in consternation as I eased my mechadendrites' work. My cargo was too valuable to just punch through the group, and I had installed a camera scrambler onto the van as a whole, meaning there was no way for them to have recognized me. Choosing patience, I slowed the van as one of the officers waved me down and ultimately stopped a few feet in front of their barricade. Whatever the poor fucker expected to find inside, wasn't it? Because the moment I lowered my window, his face turned sheet pale. Evening. I greeted. How can I help you tonight, officer? I asked, purposefully adding a subtle threatening growl to my voice, the frequency of which was designed to induce a minor uncanny valley effect on the human mind. And it worked like a charm. All 7 of his buddies now had their hands on their handguns, sweaty, twitchy hands, but none drew. They weren't that stupid. The policeman began and then stopped, slowly licking his lips as he looked up at me. Sorry, he choked on his own words. You, wouldn't happen to know anything about the gang war? I asked, waving my hand lazily and making him flinch away a good foot in fear. Yes, he practically shouted before quickly clearing his throat. I mean, yes, that is right. The gang war. Tiger Claws and Maelstrom killing each other in Watson like it's Pacifica. That gang war. Afraid not, officer, I said after pretending to genuinely consider the question. Was on a job up north just now, and I'm not stupid enough to get bogged down in gang bullshit. Bad for biz, that. Right, of course. He nodded a few times, muttering, why the fuck would a Fullborg work with them anyway? To himself, seeing me staring down at him, he cleared his throat again. Did he have some kind of lung disease? Fucking Corps couldn't even give their workers proper health care. Anyway, Night Corp put out bounties for the orchestrators. You find any information that leads to a capture. There is a pretty big stack of eddies waiting for you, he said, trying to look at me meaningfully. Goes without saying that performing a citizen's arrest will pay out a lot more. Of course. I nodded lightly, snapping a few pictures of the sweating tiger claws behind me for posterity. If I do find anything, Night Corp will be the first to know. Anything else I can help you with this fine evening? He went to speak again, but I was starting to be slightly annoyed by his delaying action and offered him a polite grin, and the moment he looked up, he very nearly pissed himself. Nothing at all, he squeaked. Have a nice evening. You too, officer. I chuckled darkly and rolled my window back up. The way all 8 NCPD officers scrambled to get out of my way was particularly soothing to my irritated mind as I drove past them and got back to my work. My way back to the mega building went almost bafflingly undisturbed after that, so much so that by the time I was satisfied with my job on Jugo, I began tuning into the Tiger's internal channels more directly and listening in to what was happening across the front. There was a lot of raging and accusations, but the bunch of Gangoons were surprisingly disciplined, despite their boss being out of commission, and managed to organize a retreat while making it out like they achieved some kind of grand victory, despite more than 200 of their comrades ending up flatlined in less than an hour. Shobo's lieutenants were particularly mouthy and twitchy. By the time I decided to pipe in, they were already scrambling to grab any tiny scrap of power and influence they could before the proverbial dust settled. But my sudden announcement that their newly collective boss was still very much alive and stable had them shutting the hell up right then and there, which allowed them to focus on more important things. Like, say, running away from fucking MaxTac, which they did. Competently enough, I supposed. They didn't manage to disengage fully, though, and even before I reached my destination, the net was already bursting with multiple compilations of MaxTac, gunning down both Tigers and Maelstrom and making it look effortless. And yes, the NCPD's special forces did in fact upload select videos of themselves while on the job. It was a particularly insidious strategy for keeping the populace nice and compliant, while under the guise of being recruitment material. Fucking corpos, I grumbled uselessly as I eased my way into the garage. Right then, ladies and gentlemen. I leaned forward against the steering wheel and spoke up, my voice easily carrying through the whole vehicle. I've had a long fucking day, and frankly I don't feel like spending the rest of it yapping with all of you so kindly. Do get out of my van. There was a lot of grumbling, especially from the bodyguards, but they were just as eager to get back to base as I was to go home, and had no real reason to protest as they started shuffling their way outside. Only for the asshole currently pretending to be unconscious to decide this was the perfect moment to speak up. Give us a moment, Jugo rasped up at his goons, all of whom up to and including the bodyguards jolted in surprise. Senko and her goons listened immediately, almost rushing outside, while the 2 bodyguards took some staring before they both nodded and left him behind. So, Jugo spoke as he tried to roll onto his back, only to hiss in pain as he felt his everything feel like it had been set on fire. How much did I fuck myself up with your Sandy? Had I veins in my head, they would be twitching right about now, despite acting the gonk. I practically spat. You stopped just at the limit. For a split second, every single muscle in his body stilled before he laughed. Shit, really? And here I thought I was killing myself. Shut the fuck up. I snapped. If you weren't being a fucking weeb, you wouldn't have had to go and kill yourself. Aha! Jugo was still laughing. So you do care? I wouldn't piss on you if you were on fire. I fired back without an ounce of hesitation. You keep telling yourself that, kid. He chuckled before turning serious. How bad is it? I quickly explained the whole situation to him, to which he simply nodded. Good. I did not quite sputter, but it was a close thing. Good. I parroted, how in the fuck does drawing Night Corp attention, losing so many men, and nearly dying yourself in one single evening make things good? Means I won't have to pussyfoot around, Mike. Do keep up. The man replied with a smirk and a wince of pain. Casualties would have been just as bad otherwise. This just skipped all the bullshit. Staring off into the wall of the garage, I couldn't help but mutter, why did I save your ass again? Because you like me, the man smirked. I want a raise. I deadpanned. Done. He didn't miss a beat. And a favor. I pressed out of sheer annoyance. Yup. Again, he didn't hesitate. Eye twitching and feeling particularly spiteful, I added, and when your chum Saigo disappears for having me dirty myself with human trafficking, you ask no questions. This time he did stop, staring into the floor of the van for a good few seconds before exhaling, "You've made your point." "I wasn't kidding, you know." My mouth twitched. "Of course you weren't." He retorted with surprising gravity, somehow managing to stare directly into the camera I was using to observe him. No comrade of mine would speak empty words, right? Forehead smacking into the steering wheel again, I sighed. Just get out of my van already. I've had enough of you for a year. By the time his bodyguards dragged him out, and I got a very satisfying notification from Regina, Jugo was still laughing at me.